Chapter 272. On the other side of the screen, although Renbochin could only see one person, there were actually many people watching this scene. It could be said that every one of them was a person of considerable status. After all, this matter was too important and might even affect the future of mankind. Can I look at something else? The bespectacled middle-aged man on the screen pushed his spectacles up and said slowly. Renbochin sneered. In the next second, a gun appeared in his hand and he pointed it at Qinshir's head. Sakuma drenched in ketchup, do you want to see it? The veins on Qinshir's forehead were throbbing. This guy really flipped out at the drop of a hat. The man on the screen was stunned at first, then his face turned angry. We are willing to display our strength, but it doesn't mean that you can casually make requests. Are you waiting to see the performance? Do you want to perform a duet for you to see? Renbochin sneered. In a place where the screen couldn't be seen, a few people almost spat out their tea. This guy's mouth was a little too poisonous. However, such a reaction was very normal. After all, that woman might be a so-called immortal cultivator. It would be strange if she was easy to talk to. The difference in strength allowed her to completely look down on ordinary people. Why don't we talk to someone else? The person behind you, at least show your face, right? Otherwise, I don't even know who I'm talking to. Right? Renbochin asked again. After Renbochin finished speaking, he waited for the response from the screen. In a faraway room, an old man put down his teacup and nodded to the person beside him. Connect it. After a while, the screen went dark. When it lit up again, the people and environment in the screen had changed. An old man sat on a chair and nodded slightly toward the screen. Hello, big boss. Renbochin put the gun behind him and immediately had a radiant look on his face. This was a real big boss. He had seen him on television more than once. Mr. Ren, I don't know how you would like us to address you. Let's call you this first. The old man smiled. His voice was very slow and his tone was very amiable. We have reached a consensus on the matter of cooperation. In that case, let's discuss on the basis of cooperation and seek common ground while reserving differences. We have some ideas, and Mr. Ren, you should also have your requests. Both sides should state them. This is the basis of communication, right? Renbochin applauded. As expected of a big shot, the way he spoke was different. He immediately set the tone. First of all, I want to ask a question. It doesn't affect our cooperation, but I want to understand something on the basis of our cooperation. Was there anyone else like Miss Qi? Is it just her, or are there others? Renbochin thought about it and felt that the other party's question was very sharp. The problem affected a wide range of areas. If there was only the Empress, why wasn't there anyone else? Since she could do it, why couldn't others? If there really was a legendary immortal cultivator, how could there only be one person? If there were others, where were they? What was his relationship with the Empress? Would they appear? These answers could affect the other party's attitude and approach in many aspects of cooperation. At this point in time, there were still many people watching the screen from a place where Renbochin couldn't see. They were carefully observing any of his subtle movements to determine some things. It's not just one person, Renbochin replied after careful consideration. As soon as he said that, many people's spirits were lifted. Some people who were watching him said, "It's almost true." They were all professionals, but they wouldn't say whether Renbochin's words were true or false. Instead, they would say it was almost true or not to provide a reference. After all, observing a person's expression and some subtle movements couldn't really tell. This was especially true for those who had undergone specialized training. What level is Ms. Qi's strength at? It's considered high. Renbochin replied. Logically speaking, she should be at the top. However, he hadn't forgotten something. It was that the former emperor led a group of people and left after attaining longevity heaven. Why did they leave? Where did they go? Great Xia had been founded for 70 years. Logically speaking, the first emperor was still far from reaching the end of his lifespan. Were there still such people? Were they still alive? Renbochin didn't know any of these. There were still many secrets in that world that he hadn't come into contact with yet. It's almost true. Where are the others? How many people are there? The old man in the video asked another question. At this point, he was a little nervous. If these people appeared in this world, no one knew what kind of changes would occur. However, one thing was certain, and that was chaos. When many powerful people appeared in this world, would they abide by the laws? Even a fool would know that it was impossible. They would only abide by some of their own rules and wouldn't care about the laws of the world. A paradise! Renbochin exclaimed. In fact, he suddenly felt that the so-called paradise in the Taoist classics might not be any different from the other world. However, there was a big difference. Even the Blessed Enclave had entrances and exits. The other world was related to the mystery of his travel. Although it was just a change of words, it already gave people a different feeling. After all, the paradise had always been associated with the so-called immortals. It's almost true. It's almost false. Some people felt that Renbochin's answer was more true, while others felt that it was false. However, more people felt that it was true. As for how many people there are, you don't have to think too much about it. They won't come here. This is because it's very difficult for them to come here and they need to fulfill an important condition. I don't need to say anything else. Renbochin's words were all true, but he concealed some things. It's almost true. In that case, can ordinary people go to the so-called paradise? No. Following that, the other party asked a lot of questions about the paradise, the cooperation between the two parties, and a question that everyone was very concerned about, whether the so-called martial arts could really help one live forever. It's impossible to live forever, but it's possible to prolong one's life. When one's cultivation reaches a certain level, one can live for 200 to 300 years, or even longer. Renbochin's words made many people excited. Lifespan had always been the instinctive pursuit of intelligent life. With today's technological progress, there might be more ways to prolong one's life in 200 to 300 years. In that case, what requests do Mr. Ren and Madam Qi have? The old man finally asked. In fact, he still had some questions, but they weren't urgent and could be answered slowly in the future. He needed to digest and think about the content of this conversation. This isn't urgent. First, withdraw the wanted order and then borrow 100 million euros. I'm out of money. Renbochin was excited. After talking for so long, he could finally ask for money. The old man's gaze froze for a moment, and then he laughed. The country's money belongs to the country. It's the people's tax money, not an individual's. The bank can grant you some loans, but remember that you have to pay them back. The old man smiled. Let's put this aside for the time being. When will Mr. Ren return to China? Come to XX with Madam Qi and have a meal. My Europe tour hasn't ended yet. Renbochin had been a little wild recently and wasn't in a hurry to return. In that case, let's wait for your early return. After all, there's still a lot to discuss about the cooperation. The old man nodded. Why are you going back for the new year? Renbochin said. He didn't go back for the new year last year. This year, his parents were so worried that he had to go back for the new year. When the laptop screen turned black, Renbochin turned to look at Qin Shi and asked, how do we get a loan? By the way, help us apply for passports. We need them urgently. Chapter 273. Papa Ren's hands trembled slightly when he saw the familiar name on the screen. "Hello, Dad, I'm going back at the end of the year." Renbachian's voice came from the other end of the phone and surprised him. He was shocked by the content. "It's good to know that you are fine. Be well outside and don't call home," Papa Ren said in a trembling voice. Even after such a long time, he still felt as if he had been struck by lightning when he recalled the news he had just heard. "It's all right, don't overthink it. I'm not a wanted criminal anymore." Renbachian laughed heartily. "What happened?" Papa Ren was shocked. "Wasn't he wanted for murder?" Renbachian replied in a deep voice, "Actually, I'm a spy. At that time, the police needed information on a criminal gang, and I happened to have dealings with them because of something. Of course, it wasn't illegal. So the police found me, and I thought it wasn't too dangerous, so I became an undercover police officer. Now that the gang has been destroyed, I'm clean." Renbachian's words stunned Papa Ren. Really? Papa Ren didn't want to think about some of the loopholes in his words. The so-called finding Renbachian because he had dealings with them sounded wrong. But he was still willing to believe that what his son said was true. "Of course it's real. Otherwise, would I dare to go back?" Renbachian replied. That's great, that's great." Papa Ren's lips were trembling, and he didn't know what to say. Renbachian felt a little guilty. "It's okay. I'll go back in 2 months." "Where are you now?" Papa Ren couldn't help but ask. After so long, he finally dared to ask this question. "I'm traveling in Europe." "Wait, I'll show you the video." Renbachian then turned on the video and let Papa Ren look at the scenery outside the window. "Come back soon. Your mother and I are very worried about you," Papa Ren couldn't help but say as he looked at the exotic buildings outside. "Understood. Go back as soon as possible and tell Mom not to worry," Renbachian said. "There won't be any more danger, right?" Papa Ren asked again. He only hung up the phone after getting a definite answer. Renbachian kept his phone and turned around. The Empress was sitting on the sofa not far away from him, flipping through a fashion magazine. Although she couldn't understand it, she could look at the pictures. At this moment, the two of them were in a hotel suite arranged by Chinshur. After a whole day, their passports and a brand new bank card were sent over. At this moment, there was really nothing else to do. They just had to wait for the two of them to return to China before they could start working together. The Empress suddenly raised her head and said, "You seem to be lying all the time recently." In the past 2 days, she had suddenly discovered this problem, and it made her a little conflicted. "People used to call me an honest and cute little husband. However, after I gave my only sincere heart to someone, I can't take it out anymore," Renbachian said with a straight face. He sighed in his heart. Back then, people really called him an honest and cute little husband. "That is my lost youth, as well as running under the setting sun." Renbachian's words made the Empress's heart beat a little faster. Every time this fellow said these words, it was always like this. "In that case, let's go." Renbachian bowed slightly and extended his hand in an inviting gesture. "Pa." 2 days later, on the basis of friendly cooperation between both parties, Chinshur had a bitter look on his face as he arranged for someone to specially deal with the shopping bags in the suite of Renbachian and the Empress. After Renbachian and the Empress left the room, they disappeared without a trace. No one was able to track the two of them at all. Renbachian and the Empress saw their surroundings change, and they were already in Yangxin Palace Hall. Light shone in through the door. Beside the Empress's wooden couch were 2 floor lamps that were also emitting light. However, the hall was still a little dim. The Empress released Renbachian's hand and returned to the couch. She lazily lay on it and looked around. The change between the two worlds, the relaxed feeling in that world, and the desolate feeling after returning had also affected her. That relaxed feeling hadn't subsided, and she didn't want to stay here for a while. Pour me some wine. With pleasure. Renbochin chuckled and put down the 2 barrels in his hands. One barrel was ammonia water, and the other barrel was silver nitrate, which was specially used to make silver mirrors. As for the other things, they could be obtained in this world, but it was slightly more troublesome. However, this world had to nurture basic physics and chemistry. Otherwise, a lot of things couldn't be done, and they couldn't bring everything from Earth. Since he went in and out of Enchanting Palace Hall every day, he knew where the wine was kept. He went straight to the wine pot and returned with a wine cup to pour the Empress a cup. Seeing the Empress drink the wine in one gulp, Renbochin filled it up again. "Drink with me," the Empress said. Renbochin poured himself a cup, gestured for her to drink it, and the wine flowed down her esophagus and into her stomach like a knife. He went to the side, opened his laptop, searched for a bit, and played a canon. The slow sound of a piano played, and a warm atmosphere grew in the hall. After drinking another cup of wine, Renbochin stretched out his hand and said, "Your Majesty, do you want to dance? I saw it at the restaurant yesterday." Renbochin was referring to the scene at the restaurant yesterday, where the 2 of them witnessed a couple proposing. Everyone at the scene gave their blessings and applause, and the restaurant played the canon at the right time. In their joy, the couple danced along with the music. Renbochin still hadn't forgotten that scene. The Empress's eyes curved, and she was a little moved. This music could really touch people's hearts. She was also a little hesitant. She had never done such a thing before, and her identity made her disdain doing such things. Renbochin took a step forward, held the Empress's fingers, and said, "Why don't you try it and see what it feels like?" The 2 of them stood facing each other. The Empress and Renbochin were about the same height, and they could look straight into each other's eyes. Renbochin put one hand on the Empress's shoulder and the other on her waist. A warm and soft touch was transmitted to his palm, causing his heart to flutter. This was the first time he and the Empress were so intimate. The Empress felt a man's hands on her body. She was a little nervous, and all the hair on her body stood up. A completely unfamiliar feeling that she had never felt before attacked her heart. "Don't be nervous. The first step is like this, the second step is like this, and the third step." Renbochin comforted the Empress softly. However, the Empress became even more nervous. Such an intimate action and the warmth from his hands made her feel as if an elephant was ramming in her heart, and her ears turned red. She felt that she had never been so clumsy before. The confidence of the 5th most powerful expert in the world had disappeared. At this moment, the Empress looked over Renbochin's shoulder and saw Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan at the door with their mouths wide open. Feeling nervous, the Empress subconsciously exerted a little force. Bang! Renbochin flew out and landed on the wall of Enchanting Palace Hall. An hour later, when Renbochin woke up, he found himself lying on the bed in Pingle Park. His whole body was in pain, and his head was hurting as well. It was as if he had suffered a serious injury. "Since you are awake, have a good rest. Don't move around for the next 2 days," the Empress said faintly as she sat on a stool not far away. Following which, she left in a hurry as if she was escaping. Renbochin wanted to touch his head, but just as he was about to exert force, he felt a burst of pain on his back, causing him to break out in cold sweat. What exactly happened? Renbochin was at a loss. How did he end up like this? After carefully recalling for a long time, he remembered that he had just returned from Milan with the Empress and drank 2 glasses of wine with her. After that, he couldn't remember how he ended up like this. Even if I drank too much, it shouldn't be as if I was stepped on by an elephant, right? What exactly happened? Chapter 274. Those who have read 264 before can watch this again. Previously, I thought of a plot and casually added it. It was indeed inappropriate. After revising it, I posted this. I repeat, it's 264,264,264. Papa Ren's hands trembled slightly when he saw the familiar name on the phone. Hello, Dad, I'm going back at the end of the year. Ren Botchian's voice came from the phone and surprised him. He was surprised by the content. It's good to know that you're fine. Be well outside and don't call home, Papa Ren said with a trembling voice. Even after such a long time, he still felt like he was struck by lightning when he thought of the news he just heard. I'm fine. Don't think too much. I'm not a wanted criminal anymore. Ren Botchian laughed heartily. What happened? Papa Ren was shocked. Wasn't he wanted for murder? Ren Botchian said in a deep voice, actually, I was undercover. At that time, the police needed information on a criminal gang. However, I happened to have dealings with them because of a certain matter. Of course, it wasn't illegal. Therefore, the police found me. I considered that it wasn't dangerous and became undercover. Now that the gang has been destroyed, I've cleared my name. Ren Botchian's words stunned Papa Ren. Really? Papa Ren didn't want to think about the loopholes in his words. The so-called finding of Ren Botchian because he had dealings with them felt wrong. However, he was still willing to believe what his son had said. Of course it's true. Otherwise, how would I dare to go back? Ren Botchian said. That's great, that's great. Papa Ren's lips trembled and he didn't know what to say. Ren Botchian felt a little guilty. It's fine. I'll go back in 2 months. Where are you now? Papa Ren couldn't help but ask. After so long, he finally dared to ask this question. Traveling in Europe. Wait, I'll video you. Ren Botchian then played the video and let Papa Ren look at the scenery outside. Come back soon. Your mother and I are very worried about you, Papa Ren said as he looked at the exotic buildings outside. Understood. Go back as soon as possible. Tell my mother not to worry, Ren Botchian said. There won't be any more danger, right? Papa Ren asked again and hung up after getting a definite answer. Ren Botchian kept his phone and turned around. The Empress was sitting on the sofa not far away from him, flipping through a fashion magazine. Although she couldn't understand it, she could look at the pictures. At this moment, the two of them were in a hotel suite arranged by Qin Shi. After a whole day, their passports and a brand new bank card were sent over. At this moment, there was really nothing else to do. They just had to wait for the two of them to return to China before they could start working together. The Empress suddenly raised her head and said, "You seem to be lying all the time recently." In the past 2 days, she had suddenly discovered this problem, and it made her a little conflicted. People used to call me an honest and cute little husband. However, after I gave my only sincere heart to someone, I can't take it out anymore, Ren Botchian said with a straight face. He sighed in his heart. Back then, people really called him an honest and cute little husband. That is my lost youth, as well as running under the setting sun. Ren Botchian's words made the Empress's heart beat a little faster. Every time this fellow said these words, it was always like this. In that case, let's go. Ren Botchian bowed slightly and extended his hand in an inviting gesture. Pa! Ren Botchian was speechless. 2 days later, on the basis of friendly cooperation, Qin Shi resentfully arranged for someone to handle the shopping bags in the suite that Ren Botchian and the Empress were staying in. After leaving the room, Ren Botchian and the Empress disappeared without a trace. No one was able to track the two of them at all. Ren Botchian and the Empress saw their surroundings change, and they were already in Yangxin Palace Hall. Light shone in through the door. Beside the Empress's wooden couch were 2 floor lamps that were also emitting light. However, the hall was still a little dim. The Empress released Renbachian's hand and returned to the couch. She lay on it lazily and looked around. The change between the 2 worlds, the relaxation in that world, and the coldness after returning had also affected her. That relaxed feeling hadn't faded, and she didn't want to stay here for a while. Pour some wine for me. With pleasure. Renbachian chuckled and put down the 2 buckets in his hands. One of the 2 buckets was ammonia and the other was silver nitrate, which was specially used to make silver mirrors. As for the other things, they could be obtained in this world, but it was slightly more troublesome. However, this world had to develop basic physics and chemistry. Otherwise, a lot of things couldn't be done, and they couldn't bring everything from Earth either. After going in and out of Yangxin Palace Hall every day, Renbachian knew where the wine was kept. He went straight to the wine jug and returned with a wine cup to pour the Empress a cup. Seeing the Empress drink the wine in one gulp, Renbachian filled it up again. "Drink with me," the Empress said. Renbachian poured himself a cup, motioned for her to drink it, and the wine flowed down her esophagus and into her stomach like a knife. He went to the side, opened his laptop, searched for a bit, and played a canon. The slow sound of a piano played, and a warm atmosphere grew in the hall. After drinking another cup of wine, Renbachian stretched out his hand and said, "Your Majesty, do you want to dance? I saw it at the restaurant yesterday." Renbachian was referring to the scene at the restaurant yesterday, where the 2 of them witnessed a couple proposing. Everyone at the scene gave their blessings and applause, and the restaurant played the canon at the right time. In their joy, the couple danced along with the music. Renbachian still hadn't forgotten that scene until now. The Empress's eyes curved. She was a little moved. This music could really touch people's hearts. She was also a little hesitant. She had never done such a thing before, and her status made her disdain doing such things. Renbachian took a step forward, held the Empress's fingers, and said, "Why don't you give it a try and see how it feels?" The 2 of them stood facing each other. The Empress and Renbachian looked about the same height, and they could look straight into each other's eyes. Renbachian put one hand on the Empress's shoulder and the other on her waist. A warm and soft touch was transmitted to his palm, causing his heart to flutter. This was the first time he and the Empress were so intimate. The Empress felt a pair of men's hands on her body. She was a little nervous, and all the hair on her body stood on end. She had never felt this way before, and it was a completely unfamiliar feeling. Don't be nervous. The first step is like this, the second step is like this, and the third step. Renbachian comforted the Empress softly. However, the Empress became even more nervous. Such an intimate action and the warmth from his hands made her feel as if an elephant was ramming around in her heart. Her ears had also turned red. She felt that she had never been so clumsy before. The confidence of the 5th most powerful expert in the world had completely disappeared. At this moment, the Empress looked over Renbachian's shoulder and saw Qin Yuan and Hong Wuan at the door with their mouths wide open. The Empress was nervous and subconsciously exerted a little force. Bang! Renbachian immediately flew out and stuck to the wall of Yangxin Palace Hall. An hour later, Renbachian woke up and found himself lying on the bed in Pingle Park. His whole body was in pain, and his head was aching as well. It was as if he had suffered a serious injury. Since you are awake, rest well. Don't move around for the next 2 days, the Empress said faintly from a stool not far away. Following which, she left in a hurry as if she was escaping. Renbachian wanted to touch his head, but just as he was about to exert force, he felt a burst of pain on his back, causing him to break out in a cold sweat. What exactly happened? Renbachian was at a loss. How did he become like this? After carefully recalling for a long time, he remembered that he had just returned from Milan with the Empress. Then, he drank 2 glasses of wine with the Empress. After that, he couldn't remember how he became like this. Even if I drank too much, it shouldn't be as if I was stepped on by an elephant, right? What exactly happened? Chapter 275. After lying in bed for 2 days and using a lot of precious herbs, Rinpoche was finally able to get up and move around. Up until now, he still didn't know what exactly happened, but he knew the condition of his body. Many bones in his back and shoulder blades were cracked, and he almost had a concussion. It seemed like he was hit by a truck. But how could there be a truck in Yangshin Palace Hall? The only person who could do it was the Empress. However, when he asked this question, the Empress avoided it and even her ears turned red. This made him even more curious about what happened that day. If he said that he angered the Empress after drinking and was beaten up by her, why did her ears turn red? She would only behave like this when she was shy. But what exactly happened? If he couldn't figure it out, he didn't want to think about it. The Empress wouldn't tell him either. Qin Yuan and Hong Wuan should know, but they didn't say anything either. Even if he racked his brains, he wouldn't have thought that he would dance with the Empress, let alone cause a murder. When he was able to move a little, he asked someone to carry him to the empty space next to the training ground beside the palace and told the people from the Ministry of Works about his plans for a school. In fact, it was just to erect a wall and build a few houses. In addition to the 3 houses for school, there was also a library for books and reading, and a laboratory. However, the first thing to do was to build the 3 houses. The rest could be done slowly. After another 2 days, Rinpoche was finally able to move by himself. Although his body was still in pain, it wasn't a big deal. This world was indeed unique in terms of medicine, whether it was the black mud cream or the medicine this time. With his previous injuries, he would probably need at least a month to walk on Earth. 100 days to recover from a serious injury wasn't an exaggeration. When they returned to Earth, the 2 of them went directly to Spain and stayed there for 3 days. In fact, there was a place in Spain that Rinpoche wanted to see. It was Barcelona's Celestial Beach. In the past, he only heard about it on the internet and always wanted to see it. However, the weather wasn't right, and the Empress was beside him. The Empress almost flipped the table when she saw the bikini. If she saw Celestial Beach, Rinpoche felt that he wouldn't have a good ending. You won't die if you don't court disaster. Rinpoche deeply agreed with this wise saying of the ancients. This time, Rinpoche brought along a set of glass laboratory utensils and glucose. Then, he headed straight to the glass factory with his imperial bodyguards. As soon as he arrived at the glass factory, a burly man greeted him, Sir Ren. This burly man was called Zhao Zhua, and he had been working for the imperial family. Previously, when the glass factory was being built, Rinpoche and the Empress wanted him, and he was finally assigned to this position. This person had followed the caravan to the Yun Nation and Dayo a few times and was literate. Furthermore, he was one of the few ancient race members who were more cautious and meticulous. He would be a pretty good helper. Of course, this cautiousness and meticulousness was only relative. In the beginning, it caused a lot of trouble. However, things had gotten better recently. How have you been recently? Is the color of the glass gone? Rinpoche asked after getting off the horned cow. Sir Ren, I was just about to report that the color of the glass is much lighter than before. I reckon that we will be able to produce colorless glass very soon, Zhao Zhua said with a joyful look on his face. Let's go take a look. Rinpoche nodded slightly. A moment later, he saw a flat piece of glass placed in a room. Part of it was green in the past, while the other part was green now. Comparing the 2 pieces, one could see that the color was much lighter. Well done. Rinpoche nodded. It's what I should do. Zhao Zhua grinned. Have you made the molds that I asked you to make? Renbachien asked. Yes, and I have tried to make some of them. Zhao Zhuo opened the box at the side and revealed some glass cups. They were all classical cups and goblets, and their color was also a little green. Sir, if we bring these things to the Yun nation and Great Xia, they can be sold for a high price, Zhao Zhuo said with a smile. Renbachien picked up 2 of them and looked at them carefully. He shook his head slightly and said, they are still a little rough. The thickness of the walls and the bottom of the cups aren't very uniform. Remake the molds and get the best craftsmen. Got it, sir. Zhao Zhuo had a look of regret in his eyes. He felt that the ones in the box were pretty good. However, they still weren't up to standard for Deputy Prefect Ren. Following which, Renbachien moved the box that contained the glassware out and found a room to conduct the silver mirror reaction experiment. When Zhao Zhuo saw the glassware that Renbachien took out, he finally understood why Renbachien didn't like the glass cups that they made. The color of the bottles and jars that Renbachien took out was pure and transparent. There were almost no flaws, and the glass cups that they made could not be compared to them. For the next few days, Renbachien would go to the glass factory every day. Every day, he would use those glass bottles and jars to conduct experiments in that small room. He would mumble words like sodium hydroxide, silver nitrate, ammonia, and so on that no one could understand. From time to time, he would kick the wall in frustration. Ah! Hearing the angry screams from inside, the imperial bodyguards outside were already used to it. In any case, no matter what Renbachien was doing inside, they just didn't let anyone in to disturb him. After spending a few days and experiencing dozens of failures, Renbachien finally completed the silver mirror reaction experiment. For most people, this experiment could be completed in 2 hours. When he looked at the palm-sized mirror in his hand, his face was filled with joy. His chemistry teacher could finally rest in peace in the netherworld. After the first time, the second time would be much easier. Renbachien called a few craftsmen over and taught them how to make the silver mirror step by step. In the afternoon, cries of "Ah" and "Why are you guys as stupid as pigs" could be heard coming from the room again. Sir, what's a pig? Someone asked. Return to the city. Renbachien stormed out of the room with blue veins popping out on his forehead. Lu Pinghai should be here in the next few days, right? A handsome young man dressed in embroidered clothes asked while riding on a horse. Young master, this is the news, a middle-aged man with a long spear on his back replied. Looking at the young man beside him, there was a trace of regret in his eyes. The last descendant of the Yu family was actually a cripple in terms of cultivation. Unless he could get his hands on Lu Pinghai's spirit yuan pill. It was just that he didn't know if the item that he brought this time would make him relent. I will definitely succeed. Even Lu Pinghai will be tempted by this item. I will get the spirit yuan pill and take back what belongs to me, the young man said with a smile. In his eyes, there wasn't a trace of doubt on whether he could succeed or not. Everything that happened was God's way of training for me. I will definitely succeed. I will return the disdain and supercilious looks that those people gave me one by one. Uncle Ping, it has been hard on you all these years. If it wasn't for your kindness to the Yu family, I'm afraid I wouldn't be alive today, the young man sighed. It's my duty, the man addressed as Uncle Ping replied. You're an Earth embryo realm expert, and yet you're guarding a cripple like me. You don't know how many people are secretly cursing you, the young man said with a smile. If it wasn't for Uncle Ping, he wouldn't even be able to keep the last things that belonged to the Yu family. Uncle Ping smiled and didn't reply. When the two of them reached the outskirts of the village, the young man stopped and looked at it. It's really shabby. Then, he turned to look at the forest at the side. That was where the grave of Lu Qi, Lu Pinghai's best friend, was. At this moment, Uncle Ping's expression suddenly changed. Young master, be careful. Before he finished his sentence, he had already appeared in front of the young man at lightning speed. The long spear on his back was already held horizontally in his hand, deflecting 2 incoming arrows. Ah! A surprised sound came from the forest. Then, 2 burly men who looked exactly the same walked out from the forest. "You're the 3rd batch. Aboriginals." Uncle Ping's expression changed. The other party should have the same purpose as him. As for the other party saying that he was the 3rd batch, there was no need to ask about the whereabouts of the previous 2 batches. "Do you want to do it, or should I?" The 2 Aboriginal men looked at each other. Rock, paper, scissors. Uncle Ping's face turned red. No matter what, he was still an Earth embryo realm expert. When had he ever been humiliated like this? Come. The limit is 10 moves. If you don't die, I'll let you go." One of the burly men walked out with an expression as if he had won a prize. He looked at the broadsword in the other party's hand. It looked like the standard broadsword of Deo, but it was longer and thicker. "Young master, step back first," Uncle Ping said in a deep voice. He didn't doubt the other party's words. Once the Aboriginals made a promise, they wouldn't go back on it. As long as he could withstand 10 moves from the other party, he was still confident in his strength. The other party had underestimated him. He had a move that had never failed before. Those who had seen it before were all dead. Unfortunately, there were 2 opponents this time, and he could only use that move once. 2 minutes later, the burly man spat at the corpse in front of him. Then, he punched the sorrowful young man to death. He then dragged the 2 corpses into the forest. What's this? It looks like something good." A voice came from the forest. "Keep it. I'll show it to the great general when I get back." Chapter 276. In the Eastern Sea, an old man in green robes stopped outside a small fishing village. The old man had nothing on him other than a flute at his waist and a jar of wine in his hand. Looking at the somewhat dilapidated village, the elder's gaze was filled with sorrow and nostalgia, as well as reminiscing about the years that had passed. In the blink of an eye, so many years had passed. "I'm afraid that in a few years, this village will no longer exist." The old man stood outside the village for a long time before turning around and walking towards a small forest nearby. However, he had only taken a few steps when he stopped. "Come out," the old man said in a deep voice. As soon as the old man's voice fell, 2 men wearing coarse clothes walked out from the small forest in front of them. They had the same face, the same height, the same sturdy body, the same bald head, and the simple expression on their faces. Just by looking at their faces, they gave people the impression that they were simple men from the mountains. However, the long sabers on their shoulders gave them an austere aura. "8th in the world, Lu Pinghai. We 2 brothers have been waiting for you for a long time." The 2 of them spoke at the same time, their voices somewhat muffled. Lu Pinghai looked at the 2 of them without moving his brows. Aboriginals rarely appeared in the other nations, but they had specifically come here. It was unknown whose orders they were under. "His Majesty said that he wants to exchange a primary spirit elixir with you. You can name your conditions," the 2 continued. True enough. Lu Pinghai suddenly realized that it was Qi Zixiao. "Tell Qi Zixiao that I don't want anything. You can go back." Lu Pinghai shook his head. "Her Majesty said that if you don't agree, she will look for you personally," the 2 of them said. The Empress actually said that if Rinpoche didn't agree, she would beat him to death. But if he said that, Lu Pinghai would probably turn hostile on the spot. No matter what, he was still ranked 8th in the world. How could he allow others to threaten him like this? "Then let Qi Zixiao come and find me." Lu Pinghai laughed and walked past the 2 of them, not even sparing them a glance. Although Qi Zixiao was ranked 5th in the world and there was also Hong Wu, who was ranked 9th in the world, he was not afraid of them. As the 8th most powerful expert in the world, he definitely had his own confidence. If they hadn't fought, who knew what would happen? Qi Zixiao was originally ranked 7th, but didn't he also kill the 5th Hua Sanlu? How could he not have any trump cards? Lu Pinghai, do you really want to offend His Majesty for a primary spirit, Dan? Both of them turned around, their hands already on their blades. Although Qi Zixiao is powerful, she won't make me hand over my things just because of her words. Today, for Qi Zixiao's sake, I'll let you two leave. Don't act recklessly. Lu Pinghai coldly snorted and swung his sleeves behind him. Immediately, his sleeves extended several meters like snakes and coiled around the hilts of the two sabers. Clang! The two of them unsheathed their long sabers and slashed at their sleeves. However, a sudden force came from the sleeves and pushed the sabers away. The two long sabers slashed at their own necks. Roar! The two of them lowered their heads at the same time, their blades crisscrossing as they slashed at each other's sleeves. However, they missed. The sleeve loosened its grip on the saber hilt as if it was a living thing, then heavily struck the two men's chests. The two men could not help but fall back. They only stopped after retreating 7 or 8 steps. Blood flowed from the corner of their mouths. Lu Pinghai was surprised. Even an expert who had just attained the spirit will level wouldn't be able to withstand such an attack, let alone a direct hit on their chests. Yet, the two of them were still standing there. The Aboriginals really had a lot of experts, and they were already this strong with just 2 people sent out. It's not easy to cultivate. I'll let you two off today. Lu Pinghai left these words and disappeared into the forest. The two men looked at each other, turned around, and left. Since the two of them were no match for him, they had to go back and tell the general about Lu Pinghai's rejection. Lu Pinghai entered the forest, went straight to his residence, and finally sat down in an open space. His old friend had lived here for decades, but now, he couldn't even find his grave. However, this was also good since no one would disturb him. He knew where Rinpoche lived even with his eyes closed. I'm back to see you again. Lu Pinghai opened the wine gourd, drank a mouthful, and sprinkled a little on the ground. He looked at the silver mirror in his hand and then at the craftsman and Zhao Zhua in front of him. How many days did it take for you to make this silver mirror? How stupid are you? Even a dark-faced man is smarter than you. A dark-faced man was a nickname for a wild boar. 2 days. Rinpoche squinted at the craftsman who answered him. Even a black-faced man would be able to make these things in 2 days. The craftsmen lowered their heads and listened to him quietly. A row of tall and burly men stood there with their heads lowered like a wall. Rinpoche nagged for a long time before finally saying, each of you will be rewarded with 10 taels of silver and your monthly allowance will be increased by 1 level. Even though these people were hopelessly stupid, they still managed to do it. They should be scolded and rewarded. Thank you, sir. Everyone immediately put on a smile. 10 taels of silver was equivalent to more than 2 months of their monthly allowance. Furthermore, their monthly allowance would be increased by 1 level, which was a lot of money. All of you may leave. Rinpoche let the craftsman leave first and then instructed Zhao Zhua on the main tasks. At this moment, the most important ones were concave and flat mirrors, which were used to make solar furnaces. After these were completed and the Mount Damo iron ore mine was settled, they could then sell it to other countries through caravans to make money. For the next period of time, Rinpoche woke up in the morning and went to the glass factory. At noon, he returned to the palace and practiced martial arts in the afternoon. After the problems with the glass and silver plating were solved, the next step was much smoother. Even though the production speed of the glass factory wasn't fast, it was much faster than when they first started. The ratio of the materials had also been found, and the number of problems had decreased. After a week, the concave and silver mirrors had already filled 2 rooms. Next, Renbachien led the craftsmen to the glass factory every day to use wood and rattan to make square shelves. The shelves were also concave. Then, the mirrors were fixed on the shelves. A few days later, in the afternoon, a convoy of more than 100 people majestically left Lan City and headed straight for the glass factory outside the city. However, they didn't enter the newly built brick building. Instead, they went to an open space beside the glass factory. At this moment, there was a wooden platform there. On top of the platform, there was a huge shelf that was 6 meters tall and 12 meters wide. On top of the shelf were concave mirrors. From a distance, it was dazzling and blinding. Many people covered their eyes with their hands to block the white light. The Empress came down from the carriage. Behind her were Shiqing, Zhizhihai, Tu Wan, Tong Zhinya, Qin Chuan, and the other high-ranking officials from the 6 ministries. As long as they were free, they were pulled over by the Empress. Everyone was guessing what the Empress wanted to see by calling so many people over. At this moment, when they saw the distorted scenery reflected in the concave mirrors on the tall shelf, Shiqing, Zhikohai, Tong Zhinya, and the others immediately knew what it was. It was just that they didn't know if it was like what Deputy Prefect Ren said. If it was, it would be a joyous occasion. The others looked at the large mirror in front of them with curiosity. Is that a mirror? I don't know what it is made of. It doesn't look like a bronze mirror, but it's actually so bright. But the reflection doesn't seem to be moving. Look at the stone in the mirror, it's deformed. Hey, look at the person reflected in the mirror. His body is so short. I'm dying of laughter. The Empress looked at the large mirror in front of her. After sizing it up for a moment, she said to Renbachien, "You can start now." Renbachien looked very relaxed. After such a long time, he had finally made this. Now was the time to showcase it. He hoped that this bunch of idiots wouldn't mess it up. Following his greeting, 30 guards who were usually in charge of his arrangements ran to one side and carried out 30 mirrors that were 2 meters long and 1 meter tall. Then, they placed them on the ground in front of the shelf. Following which, someone carried out a 4 meters long iron pillar that was as thick as the mouth of a bowl and placed it on the ground. Renbachien walked to the front of the 30 mirrors and adjusted the angle of one of them to reflect the sunlight onto the concave mirror on the shelf. Then, after the concave mirror focused the sunlight onto the top of the iron pillar. After he adjusted the angle, the others followed his movements and began to adjust the mirror. From time to time, Renbachien helped everyone adjust the mirror. At the beginning, many people had their eyes on him. However, as the Empress, Shiqing, and the others stared at the top of the iron pillar, more and more people looked over. They were doubtful about what they could see. But immediately, they got a huge shock. The top of the iron pillar suddenly burst into flames for no reason. One had to know that this was an iron pillar. Everyone wasn't blind. From the footsteps of the person carrying the iron pillar and the way it stood up, it was definitely an iron pillar. But how could an iron pillar catch fire? Something even more surprising happened. Not only was the top of the iron pillar on fire, but it was also melting. Dark red molten iron flowed down the body of the pillar. Very quickly, the top of the iron pillar was missing a chunk. Not only were those who saw it for the first time shocked, even Shiqing and the others were surprised. Previously, it was only a round plate that burned a hole in a steel saber. Now, it melted an iron rod that was as thick as the mouth of a bowl. The difficulty was more than 10 times or even 100 times greater. Therefore, when they personally saw the effect, they were all shocked. I congratulate Your Majesty and Dayo. Deputy Prefect Ren has made a great contribution by making this item. Within 100 years, Dayo will no longer have to worry about a shortage of iron, Shirqing said loudly with a face full of joy. Following his words, everyone reacted and congratulated Her Majesty one after another. Although they didn't know what happened, they understood one thing. That iron pillar that was as thick as the mouth of a bowl had been melted. In that case, Mount Damo's iron mine would soon have a steady stream of fine iron ore. They would no longer have to worry about the lack of military equipment. This was indeed a joyous occasion, a joyous occasion. And Renbaqian, who had contributed the most to this matter, had a higher status in the hearts of many people. Previously, when Her Majesty said that she wanted him to set up an academy, everyone didn't take it too seriously. Many people didn't even consider it. In the future, if Her Majesty asked about it, they would say that even though the disciples in their family were not talented enough, they just needed to focus on practicing martial arts. However, from the looks of it now, this person really had some capabilities. Chapter 277. On the second floor of a restaurant on Jingyang Avenue near Beihong District, more than 10 young men and women were sitting around 2 tables. Have you heard that Her Majesty wants to open an educational institute? A tall and burly youth who was about 16 or 17 years old said while drinking at the table. Renbaqian is in charge, another youth casually said. Humph. The one who spoke was a beautiful young girl who was about 17 or 18 years old. She slammed her bowl on the table. The others looked at her and laughed mischievously, but they didn't restrain themselves. This young girl was called Lu Yueyao. She suffered a big loss during the Great Hunt and was verbally abused by Renbaqian. In the end, everyone had no choice but to stand up and target her. After that, she received 10 lashes and was grounded for a month as punishment. Originally, she wanted to find an opportunity to take revenge after she was released. However, after staying at home for a few days, she heard a piece of news that made her dumbstruck. That pretty boy who only knew how to talk was actually chosen as the Empress's future husband. She couldn't figure out what Her Majesty saw in that kid. Her Majesty wasn't only the Empress, but she was also the 7th most powerful expert in the world. Her beauty was enough to enchant countless people. However, such a person actually chose that kid as her husband. This almost made her smash everything in the room. As time went by, her hatred for Renbaqian didn't diminish at all. Instead, it intensified. Every time she heard news about Renbaqian, she would feel unhappy. However, the others didn't care much about her feelings. Instead, they chatted about the educational institute. What does an educational institute teach? This wasn't something that only one person wanted to know. Educational institutes were still new in Dayo. It should be the same as Great Xia. They teach calligraphy, mathematics, military strategy, and law, someone said with certainty. Maybe there's even Confucian classics. Someone laughed. That's hard to say, someone replied. Confucian classics was the general name for several doctrines that were passed down a long time ago. They mainly taught people to be kind, how to discipline themselves, and how to think about heaven and earth, society, and people and nature. It was the main doctrine in Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Qin nation. However, the aboriginals didn't like it, let alone the descendants of the officials. In Dayo, the fist was the hard truth. Although there were laws, in most people's hearts, fists were the most important. Everyone put this matter aside after discussing for a while. Besides practicing martial arts, these young people would at most read a few books at home. They would also call their friends to have fun outside and occasionally talk about the happenings in Lon City. For example, the matter of the Black Star Academy. Everyone just casually talked about it, and no one took it too seriously. It was also impossible for them to enter any school. Everyone knew that only those who were not particularly talented would go. Renbochin was sitting in Yangxin Palace Hall with a list of names given to him by the Empress. On it were the names of the students who were sent by the court officials to enter the academy. Shirgan, don't tell me he's the grandson of the great elder. Renbochin casually asked when he saw the first name. It's his youngest son, the Empress said faintly. Pooh! Great elder is indeed young at heart despite his age, Renbochin exclaimed. The great elder should be at least 70 or 80 years old, right? It was written that Shirgan was 12 years old, which meant that the great elder was still having a son when he was 60 or 70 years old. Renbochin continued to read and immediately saw a familiar name. Tonglan, 10 years old. This little girl's innate talent isn't good. Renbochin was shocked. She was only 10 years old, yet she kept telling him why flowers were so red and that her innate talent wasn't good. Tonglan's innate talent is pretty good, at least it's better than her grandfather, the Empress said. Didn't they say that all the students are good-for-nothings with poor innate talent? Renbochin pointed at the name list and questioned. Tongjianye said that since she's still young, she can stay in the academy for 2 years and consider it as finding a playmate. The Empress plucked a grape and threw it into her mouth. Renbochin was speechless. Do you think this is a kindergarten? However, after thinking about it, he had suffered so many losses in the hands of that girl and suffered so many beatings. This was a good opportunity for him to take revenge. It's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. As for the thought of letting her off because she was a delicious Lolita, Renbochin extinguished it before it could even form in his mind. If you don't take revenge, you're not a gentleman. A great man can't be ruthless. These were the words of the ancestor, and he couldn't forget them. Hee hee. Renbochin grinned and laughed. The Empress took another look at him and rolled her eyes. She could roughly guess what Renbochin was thinking at this moment. However, that girl Tonglan was very crafty. At that time, it was uncertain who would be torturing who. Renbochin looked at the names on the list. There were a total of 31 people, which was about what he expected. He could only teach these disciples by himself. However, after thinking about it, Renbochin said, "Can you recruit a few from the commoners? They can stay in the academy as teachers in the future." After all, these were the children of the big shots in the imperial court. In the future, they would most likely become officials in various places. He couldn't possibly be the only one teaching them, right? All right. The Empress nodded her head. But, have you thought of a name? Lanxiang Academy. Renbochin looked serious. Seeing that the Empress's eyes were starting to twitch, Renbochin immediately changed his tune and said, "I'm joking. Actually, it's called New East." Seeing that the Empress's eyes were starting to emit a murderous aura, Renbochin changed his tune again and said, "Actually, this is also a joke. Let's call it Black Bamboo Academy. A few days ago, I saw a few purple bamboos in a small bamboo forest nearby." The Empress was more or less satisfied when she heard this name. She continued to eat her grapes and ignored Renbochin. It's going to be New Year in a month, right? Are there any activities for New Year? After that, the academy will start the enrollment, Renbochin asked. He still didn't know how to celebrate New Year in Dayo. Yes, lantern grabbing. The Empress explained. In the past, it was limited to young people below the age of 20, and the winners will be rewarded. If the others perform well, they will also be favored by the girls in the villages. If you want to participate, I can give you special permission to participate. If you perform well, I might even reward you. The Empress said with a smile on her face. What rules? Renbochin was immediately excited. First, build a frame and hang the lantern on it. The participants will be divided into groups of 10 and can choose their own people. The person who grabs the lantern first wins. The Empress's eyes were full of smiles. Don't tell me I can fight against the others. Renbochin immediately laughed dryly. Of course, this is the time to show off your skills, the Empress said as a matter of course. Forget it then. Renbochin immediately rejected her. He couldn't even beat a 10-year-old Lolita, so he would be courting death if he participated. Don't you want to hear about my reward? The Empress's tone carried a rare gentleness that made Renbochin's heart flutter. However, he immediately shook his head like a rattled drum and said, I'm a man and I won't participate if I say I won't. Since the Empress had spoken like this, it definitely wasn't anything good. There was a huge pit ahead, and only a fool would jump into it. I can give you a kiss. The Empress's voice was so soft that Renbochin could hear her clearly. Upon hearing this, Renbochin suddenly raised his head and looked at the Empress. Her face was flushed, and her shy look made Renbochin feel as if there was a pile driver in his chest. Renbochin put on a righteous face and said, I feel that death is inevitable. It can be as heavy as Mount Tai or as light as a goose feather. I will die without regrets for your majesty. Then, he changed the topic and said helplessly, It's not that I'm unwilling to participate in the lantern grabbing contest, but I've been afraid of heights since I was young and can't climb high. Therefore, even though I feel pain, I have no choice but to give up. Chapter 278. On a plane flying from Tokyo to Shanghai, Renbochin looked at the Empress who had thrown a tantrum for a few days and sighed. I think I'd better participate in the lantern grabbing event. Even though I have a serious fear of heights, a real man has his limits. The Empress tilted her head, looked at him from the corner of her eyes, and then turned to look at the scenery outside. The Empress had been throwing a tantrum for a few days. She didn't say a word and only rolled her eyes when she saw him. She wasn't like the cold and aloof Empress at all. This was the first time such a situation had happened to the Empress. At first, he felt that the Empress was quite amusing, but after a long time, it wasn't so fun anymore. In fact, Renbochin had some guesses in his heart. Could it be that the Empress had come to visit her? This was because the Empress would occasionally reveal such a feminine side, which was very different from her usual self. Other women had good tempers most of the time, but there would always be a few days a month when they were not normal and had a terrible temper. On the other hand, the Empress was cold and aloof most of the time. Every month, she would be abnormal and very feminine. The more Renbochin thought about it, the more he felt that this possibility was not small. As the saying went, there must be something wrong with something abnormal. Renbochin reached out and grabbed the Empress's hand. It was very soft and warm. He was relieved that he didn't feel the expected paw, and the pain didn't come. These few days, he had also asked people about the lantern-grabbing event and more or less understood it. Just like what the Empress said, the lantern-grabbing event was divided into groups of 10. 9 of them were there to protect the commander. The participating groups could also attack other groups. Even though they couldn't be heavy-handed, there would be serious injuries every year. Fortunately, the Aboriginals had thick skin and flesh, so there wouldn't be any deaths. Also, both parties couldn't use weapons, but they could wear armor. Generally, it was leather armor. It wasn't very useful, but it had some protective effect. This gave Renbochin some ideas. Since they could wear armor, was there a limit to leather or iron armor? He could make a full-body armor with steel spikes and make himself look like a hedgehog. Who would dare to touch him then? When the time came, he just had to bump into the crowd. It was decided. When the plane landed, Renbochin held the Empress's hand and walked out of the cabin. They froze like dogs. The two of them had just come back from Hawaii. They had changed planes in Japan and had specially bought 2 thick coats. However, it was still very cold when they came out. So cold. Renbochin tightened his clothes with one hand and pulled the Empress's hand with the other. They followed the crowd and walked forward. But he was finally back. It had been almost half a year. When he escaped, it was the end of June and the beginning of July. Now, it was the last day of December. Tomorrow would be the new year. Mr. Renbochin was stopped the moment he stepped out of the airport. The other party was a man in his 30s, and there was a man and a woman beside him. There's actually a plane to pick me up. This treatment is a little beyond the norm. Renbochin laughed. It looks familiar. I think I've seen it before. Yes, I was even shot by Mr. Ren before, the other party said with a face full of hidden bitterness. It was just a joke. Don't be offended. Actually, I have a lot of respect for people like you who work for the country. Renbochin immediately knew who it was. He laughed and directly brushed the matter aside. All three looked askance at him. Respect? Sorry, they really couldn't tell. Both of you, please. The three of them didn't say anything else. There were 2 cars waiting outside. Renbochin and the Empress got into the car at the back while the middle-aged man sat in the front passenger seat. Renbochin held the Empress's hand along the way. In any case, as long as there wasn't a pa, he wasn't prepared to let go and was prepared to hold her hand until next year. 2 hours later, the car entered the underground parking lot of a building and the few of them alighted. After entering the elevator, the Empress lowered her head and looked at the hand that Renbochin was still holding. Pa. Renbochin looked at his hand that was swollen like a pig's trotter and said seriously, it's a little thicker and rounder than last time. I might have put on weight recently. The three of them looked askance at him and inexplicably felt that they had been showered with dog food. When they got out of the elevator, there were already people waiting outside. 5 or 6 men and women in suits were waiting at the entrance. The one in front said rather enthusiastically, Mr. Ren, Madam Chi, you are finally back. Those who didn't know would think that the 2 of them had gone overseas to study. The other party was a newly established department with a huge research team behind them. They were prepared to study the things that Renbochin had brought out. For the next half of the day, they discussed in detail about some cooperation matters. The previous time was just a preliminary agreement between both parties. This time, it was official. First of all, Renbochin couldn't be as reckless as before. At least, he still had to abide by the country's laws. He couldn't be reckless just because of his special status. With regards to this, Renbochin didn't have any objections. If no one provoked him, he wouldn't create trouble for no reason anyway. However, Renbochin asked for the identities of the 2 secret departments, which was the department that Qinsher was in. In the future, it would be easier to deal with matters outside. At the very least, they could scare off a lot of trouble if they encountered any problems. Originally, the other party wanted to give Renbochin and Qi Zixiao a nominal position in the army, but was rejected by Renbochin. If that was the case, the 2 of them would be tied together. After that, they added some details about the cooperation. For example, if the research results of the things that Renbochin brought back were to be studied, how would they be distributed? Generally speaking, the country would take the majority. However, Renbochin had the right to know. There was no reason for him to be kept in the dark about the research results of the things that Renbochin brought back. Furthermore, some of the research results could be converted into commercial applications. Both parties added some details in this area. For this matter, Renbochin couldn't possibly ask a lawyer for help. It was entirely up to him. He didn't know if he would be at a disadvantage or benefiting from some aspects. After half a day, both parties understood some of the ideas of the other party and reached a partial agreement. In the end, Renbochin felt that his brain was hurting. It was too troublesome to talk to these people because it was all about minor details. However, this was something that had to be done. If these things weren't explained clearly, who knew what certain people would do in the future? Especially after 10, 20, or 30 years, no one could say for sure what the current leaders would think. For most people, there wasn't a need to consider so much. However, for Renbachyan, 30 years on Earth was equivalent to 15 years. Finally, both parties reached a memorandum of understanding. As for a contract, it was impossible to have one. The Empress sat there in a daze the entire time. She wasn't the least bit interested in such matters. After that, Renbachyan took out some things that he brought along. A bottle of soil, a bottle that contained an outstanding little white flower that he picked from the garden, and a piece of stone. These things looked ordinary, but they were the foundation of a world. From these things, it might be possible to see the differences between Earth and that world. The other party immediately arranged for people to keep these things. Mr. Ren, we need something more special. The person who spoke was Yang Sen, the head of the newly established department called Messier 87. Messier 87 was a galaxy located in the constellation Virgo. This name also implied another world. From this, it could be seen that some people regarded the so-called paradise as a completely different world. After all, in the theory of Taoism, the paradise was located in the space of the big world. As a result, they had various kinds of connections with our world. At the same time, due to the relative isolation of their existence, the paradise had its own unique space-time structure. Therefore, the paradise could be said to be another world. However, Renbachyan felt that the person who came up with this name had probably seen too much Ultraman. Research always has to start from the basics. I also want to know what these basics are different from each other. I will bring some more things over a period of time, and some of them will be what you want, Renbachyan said. It's a pleasure working with you. The other party nodded. They also wanted to know what Renbachyan wanted to know. Since Renbachyan said that he would bring more things over a period of time, it was fine. You can contact me if there's anything. Yang Sen handed a business card without a name to Renbachyan. I will try my best to help you settle some things within my capabilities. However, breaking the law doesn't count. That night, Renbachyan held the Empress's hand at the bund and looked at the 4D lights in the sky. The gorgeous colors shone on everyone. There were young people everywhere, and most of the cold wind was blocked by the people around them. As time passed, the surrounding atmosphere became more and more enthusiastic. 60 seconds, 59, 58. As the countdown began, this year had come to an end. Renbachyan held the Empress's hands at the right time and stood opposite her, 10, 9, 8. As the last 10 seconds passed, many couples around them shouted while holding hands or hugging each other. In the last few seconds, many people wanted to leave a kiss that crossed the new year. Renbachyan stared into the Empress's eyes and saw that her gaze was like the surface of a lake. Her face was slightly bashful. Renbachyan moved his mouth closer to hers when the last 3, 2, 1 resounded. This was such a good opportunity. What if the Empress was infected by this atmosphere? Renbachyan thought to himself. The Empress's body shrank back a little. Then, she subconsciously raised her hand and lightly hammered Renbachyan's chest. This action was very common on television, and the Empress had seen it many times. Chapter 279. How does it feel to have a girlfriend who is highly skilled in martial arts? Renbachyan did not know if anyone had considered this question, but he felt that he was qualified to answer. It was probably similar to dating a road roller. If you were not careful, you would be buried in the ground. This was risking your life to date. After a week, he finally got out of bed. He felt that he was going to have a psychological scar. However, he had to thank the super strong ointment from the other world. Now, he still remembered Yang Sen's surprised expression when he visited the hospital. He really could not imagine how he became like this. His sternum and 2 ribs were fractured, and it was similar to being hit by a car. However, at that time, Renbochin was in the crowd at the bund. Thus, the only person who could cause harm to him was Qi Zhixiao, who went in and out with him. After hearing the news, many people guessed whether Renbochin and Qi Zhixiao had a conflict and whether it would affect their cooperation. However, Qi Zhixiao did not leave Renbochin's bedside for the next few days with an apologetic look on her face. Until someone raised the question of whether it was domestic violence. However, no one asked Renbochin for confirmation. They only felt pity when they thought of him. Naturally, Renbochin was embarrassed to say that he was bashfully punched in the chest by the Empress. However, there was one thing that he understood. If he did not want to risk his life to get married and the Empress would become a widow, he had to improve his strength. However, the Empress's attitude was not right these few days. Although it was not very obvious, he could feel it. He also knew what the reason was. When he arrived at Yangxin Palace Hall, he saw the Empress in a daze. He did not know what she was thinking about, and there was a wine flask beside her. After seeing Renbochin, the Empress regained her original cold expression. However, there was some guilt in her eyes. It was very similar to the look she had when Renbochin received a concussion. Although she could control her strength most of the time, Renbochin was really too weak. Especially when she could not maintain her calm, there were more and more emotions in her heart. If he wasn't paying attention, he might be seriously injured. Zhixiao. Renbochin stepped forward and held the Empress's hand. The Empress retracted her hand slightly, and Renbochin grabbed it. People will get used to some things bit by bit, Renbochin said softly and held the Empress's hand in both of his palms. He secretly added in his heart, this does not include being seriously injured. Don't worry too much. Many things will happen naturally. I'm afraid that one day, I'll have to personally bury you in the garden, the Empress said faintly. Her voice was a little cold, and the contents of her words were chilling. Renbochin knew that she was just feeling a little guilty, so there was a little resistance in her heart. She was afraid of hurting something. In other words, he was timid. The female Empress's heart was in a mess these few days. She did not know what she was feeling right now. In all these years, this was the first time she had felt this way. She was a little upset. It was the same feeling as before. This was the first time his heart was beating fast, the first time his heart felt like it was being pounded by an elephant, the first time he felt guilty, the first time he felt timid. I trust that you will control your power. Looking at this hand, it was beautiful, soft, and warm. It made one want to hold it forever. Even though it's very powerful, it's not meant to harm anything. Renbochin held the Empress's hand and spoke in a very warm voice. The Empress allowed Renbochin to hold her hand, and her heart was beating very fast. Renbochin gently kissed the Empress's finger. As if she had been electrocuted, her whole body trembled slightly. The coldness that had just been restored immediately melted like ice and snow. Renbochin felt that the success rate of kissing her now was very high. However, there was a saying that went, "You won't die if you don't court death." Before reaching the man-will level, Renbochin felt that his small body would not be able to take a hit. It was better not to do anything too dangerous. Don't think too much. Renbochin straightened his body and smiled. We should set off now. A lot of people should be waiting anxiously. The Empress looked at him, wrinkled her nose slightly, and let out a soft, humph. It sounded like a little girl raising her head proudly and making a sound. Renbochin knew that the Empress had recovered when he heard this sound. A few hours later, Renbochin and the Empress appeared in that building again. Mr. Ren, you recovered very quickly. Yang Sen was a little surprised. It had only been half a month, but it seemed like there were no major problems. Do you want to do a more detailed examination? No need. Renbochin waved his hand. Don't try to trick me into letting you guys study me. Yang Sen felt a little regretful. At present, both parties were in the early stages of cooperation and were more cautious. "How's the previous one?" Ren Baqian asked. Soon after, he saw a stack of printed reports. "Most of the composition is still the same, but there are many microorganisms that I have never seen before. Some of them died after leaving the soil, and some of them have undergone some changes. We need more time to find out more," Yang Sen explained briefly. "However, the common iron and calcium content in the soil is very low, and the content of titanium and potassium is higher." It could be seen that Yang Sen was very concerned about the research progress in this area, and he almost blurted it out. Ren Baqian roughly glanced at the report and put it back on the table. "Let's go to the laboratory to take a look. You guys will be interested in the things that I brought this time." Ren Baqian was very confident because he had brought the elongation saber this time. After all, they had just started working together, and he had to bring something of great value. Although there were many valuable things in that world, for example, anything from the Kirin's body, such as the cloud crystal, which was also very precious in that world, however, after thinking about it, he still brought the elongation saber over. The elongation saber's characteristics were great enough. Whether it was growth or mental control, it was enough to shock everyone. This thing wasn't very useful in his hands, but in the hands of the nation, it could be used to research a lot of valuable things. At the same time, he also wanted to know if this saber still hid any secrets. However, he didn't have the conditions or the time to experiment. He might as well bring it over. Perhaps there would be some additional gains during the research process. When Yang Sen heard what Ren Baqian said, a trace of joy appeared on his face. The things that Ren Baqian brought over previously were indeed slightly different from those on Earth, but their current value wasn't considered high. One had to know that Earth was a paradise. How could some things like soil be able to satisfy people? Accompanied by Yang Sen and 2 guards, the 2 of them entered the elevator and went all the way down to the basement. There were a few floors above this building, and they were the exposed parts. The important places were in the 3 floors below ground level. After exiting the elevator and passing through 2 doors, they were greeted by a vast expanse of green. It was as if they had suddenly arrived in a forest, and above them was a blue sky. Ren Baqian could tell that something wasn't right at first glance. He stretched out his hand to touch it and realized that it was actually a wall. The forest was fake, and presumably, the sky above them was also fake. The Empress also touched it and didn't care anymore. She thought that the surroundings were made of glass. "This is a new technology that hasn't been applied in the commercial market yet," Yang Sen said simply. Subsequently, they came to a laboratory that was filled with tempered glass partitions, various instruments and computers. It was similar to what Ren Baqian had imagined. After taking a look around, Ren Baqian had a better understanding of the laboratory. At present, there were thousands of talents in this laboratory, and they could carry out multiple projects at the same time. There were also thousands of supporting staff, including guards, kitchen staff, and assistants. At present, it was one of the more advanced laboratories in the country. Most of the previous projects had already been completed, and they were ready to fully focus on the things that Ren Baqian had brought over from the paradise. However, at present, they could only study some soil, a small flower, and a piece of rock. Most of them were idle. Very soon, Ren Baqian met the person in charge of the laboratory. He was a white-haired old man who immediately asked Yang Sen, "What did you bring this time?" "This is Elder Liu. He has done considerable research in biology and is one of the people in charge of this laboratory," Yang Sen introduced. "These 2 are Mr. Ren and Madam Qi. Mr. Ren has brought some things. The 2 of you are here for a checkup." Elder Liu's eyes lit up when he heard Yang Sen's words. "This time, I'm here to study something else." Ren Baqian shook his head slightly, and a sheath knife appeared in his hand. "What's this?" Elder Lu stared at the knife and asked. Yang Sen immediately thought of some legendary magic treasures and the like. Renbaqian drew the knife from the sheath, and before the two of them could see, he made a cut on his hand and let the blood drip onto the knife. After making a few cuts, it wouldn't hurt anymore. With a thought from Renbaqian, the knife in his hand suddenly grew from 1 foot to 2 feet. This shocked the two of them and almost made them think that it was a switchblade. Following which, it became a 3-foot blade that completely grew out of the handle. This time, Yang Sen's eyes immediately lit up. Renbaqian took out some ointment and applied it on his arm. In the blink of an eye, the wound began to close, and tender flesh began to grow. This knife is called Chongqing. You have seen its function. It can grow after sucking blood, Renbaqian told the two of them. Elder Lu stared at Renbaqian's arm and asked, What medicine is this? Black mud cream. I have a laboratory that is researching this, and it will be on the market soon, Renbaqian said faintly. Even so, Elder Lu was still very interested. Following which, he set his sights on the long knife in Renbaqian's hand and asked, It can grow only by sucking blood. Can it become shorter? With a move from Renbaqian, the Chongqing knife returned to its original size of 2 feet. It can be controlled with your mind. Furthermore, as time passes, the length will slowly return to its original size. This thing can be controlled with your mind. Elder Lu was suddenly shocked. Upon hearing this, Yang Sen's eyes lit up like a searchlight, and his breathing became heavier. Yes. Renbaqian briefly explained the situation of this Chongqing knife. Let me try, Elder Lu said. First of all, this knife could grow. The metal that could grow already proved its value. Although Renbaqian said that it could absorb blood, the quality of the blood that flowed from Renbaqian and the part that grew from the knife was too different. It completely didn't conform to the law of conservation of mass. Needless to say, it could be controlled with one's mind. If the theory was researched, it would have a huge impact on the modern world. To put it simply, it could drive with a single thought and stop with a single thought. Or to put it in another way, it could be controlled with one's mind. The thoughts in one's mind could be input into the computer. Or to put it in another way, the so-called virtual world technology. There were also other aspects. Chapter 280. Elder Lu took the elongation saber and held his breath for a long time before asking in surprise, Why isn't there any reaction? How can this be? Renbaqian took the elongation saber back to his hand. It could grow or shrink according to his will, advance or retreat, let me try. Yang Sen took it and held his breath for a long time while repeating, grow, grow. However, there was still no reaction after a long time. This time, everyone's gaze was somewhat strange. Renbaqian pondered whether it could only be used by people from another world. However, he was an earthling. He stuffed the elongation saber back into the Empress's hand to see if there were any changes. After a few seconds, the Empress raised her hand and threw the saber back to him. Only you can use it. This thing has the ability to recognize its owner. Renbaqian was flabbergasted as he didn't expect this at all. Not only was Renbaqian surprised, but everyone else was also surprised. What did it mean for it to recognize its owner? Was this saber compatible with Renbaqian in some way? Or did this saber have its own thoughts? The former was like a key opening a lock, so how did Renbaqian control this saber? As for the latter, was this saber alive? It seems like I'm the only one who can use this saber. I'll bring back the things you need in a few days. Renbaqian sheathed the saber. Although this saber was a little useless, he still felt that it was pretty good that only he could use it. Leave this saber here first. We still need to conduct some tests. Elder Lu quickly grabbed Renbaqian's arm. Although only Renbaqian could use it, this saber had great research value. Renbochin thought for a while and decided to let them study this saber to see if there were any secrets. "Don't break it, or else you won't get anything else," Renbochin exhorted. Elder Lu held the saber and ran out to call for the researchers. He couldn't be bothered with Renbochin, who was left behind. His main goal now was to study the secrets of this saber. After leaving the saber here for the time being, Renbochin left with the Empress and returned to the haunted house in SY where several people died. At least, most people in that building thought that house was a haunted house. When Renbochin appeared in that neighborhood, a few people were stunned at first, then their expressions changed drastically. They quickly called the police after Renbochin left. "Hello, 110. I saw the wanted murderer." A few policemen were stopped just as they were about to set off. After all, Renbochin's arrest warrant had already been revoked. However, these police officers had a deep impression of his case, especially that note. As soon as he heard the news, he was immediately furious and wanted to arrest him. Only after the reminder did he remember that the man was no longer a wanted criminal. Until now, many people did not understand. The case that person committed was almost irrefutable, and the impact was so big, so bad, how could the arrest warrant be cancelled? Take a look. The person who stopped them earlier threw over a piece of paper. On it was a notice of what had happened. In the notice, Renbochin became a member of a certain secret department, and the Jean family was involved in a series of cases. In fact, there was no need to issue this notice, but they were afraid that someone would cause trouble for Renbochin again. Based on what Renbochin had done in the past, he might not be able to stir up any trouble in the end. He might as well notify them. As long as he doesn't break the law in the future, don't bother with him, the policeman reiterated. Renbochin stood in front of the door and looked at the newly changed lock and the key in his hand. He was slightly speechless as he couldn't even return to his own home. After calling Qin Shi and asking where the key to the new lock was, Renbochin opened the door. There was dust everywhere, and the living room was filled with shopping bags. All of them were bought in Milan previously. There was a layer of cloth covering them, and it looked like his bed sheets. He called the housekeeper, and the housekeeper was surprised to receive the call. Renbochin explained that he wasn't a wanted criminal, that it was a misunderstanding, and that he was actually a government employee. The housekeeper immediately promised to arrange for someone to clean up the house and bring a new contract. The Empress stood there and frowned slightly. As she flicked her sleeves, the dust in the living room seemed to be blown away by a storm. In an instant, nobody could see her. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, the Empress instantly appeared outside the door, leaving Renbochin to be baptized by the dust storm. Cough, cough. Renbochin covered his nose with one hand and looked as if he had just crawled out from a pile of coal. He turned his head and looked at the Empress. The Empress looked back at him with an innocent look on her face. After waiting for an hour, the person who promised to come immediately finally arrived. At this moment, the house was even dirtier than before. The walls and ceiling were covered in dust. As long as one raised their voice, the dust would fall from the top of their heads. After more than half an hour, Renbochin, who had taken a bath and changed his clothes, dragged the Empress to the supermarket to buy ingredients, sweets, and wine. "What's the matter?" Renbochin looked at a young lady who suddenly blocked his way and asked. She was 27 or 28 years old, wearing a police coat, and had her hair tied into a ponytail. She looked very neat. The lady took out an identification card from her pocket and said, "Police. I'm just warning you not to offend me. Don't think that what you have done is over. If you think that I have done something wrong, you can arrest me." Renbochin stretched out both of his hands and smiled. He took a glance at the identification card, and it seemed that the person was called Lin Mu. "However, my arrest warrant has already been cancelled, right? The others didn't come, and only you came. If it isn't because you have a strong sense of justice, then what relationship do you have with the Jean family? I can tell you that one of them was my aunt. What did she do? She had never hurt anyone, but she died in the hands of a murderer like you. Lin Mu gnashed his teeth and said. The most important thing for a family is to be neat and tidy. This was left behind by you, right? You are a murderer. You should be executed. Although I don't know what kind of background you have to cancel your arrest warrant, it doesn't mean that the previous incident is over. The Jean family has done so many things, why didn't you arrest them? What wrong did the people who were killed by the Jean family do? Renbachien revealed a sarcastic smile. You seem to have a strong sense of justice, but in fact, you bully the weak and fear the strong. You might even be able to become a police officer because of your relationship with the Jean family. Therefore, why would you bother about them? In that case, do you want to take revenge now? Speaking up to this point, Renbachien slightly bent his body so that he could look straight into Lin Mu's eyes. He then said softly, take a guess, if you die, will anyone avenge you? Lin Mu was so angry that his whole body trembled. Do you really think that you can do whatever you want? You are threatening the police. Be careful, or I will arrest you now. Renbachien nodded seriously, yes, I can really do whatever I want. As soon as Renbachien's voice fell, he laughed. It was meaningless to provoke this self-righteous and crazy woman. He also didn't think that he could really do whatever he wanted. He was just provoking her a little. It seems like you are the one who is threatening me, right? I forgot to mention that I am a civil servant, but you are not qualified to know my specific identity. What I do is a national secret. As for the previous question, you should ask the Jean family when they are still around. Can you really do whatever you want with money and power? I believe they will give you an answer. Renbachien smiled, turned around, and pulled the Empress. They walked past the woman, leaving her gritting her teeth and standing in the same place. You are very boring. The Empress was slightly dissatisfied. She actually wasted so much time on someone unrelated to her. I just wanted to teach her a lesson. Moreover, I hate such self-righteous people. Chapter 281. Renbachien didn't take the policewoman seriously, but after seeing her, Renbachien recalled the aftermath of the Jean family. After returning to the car, he gave Chen Shi a call as he should be more familiar with the situation. After asking, he found out that the Jean family was in a mess after he escaped. Several of the main leaders were dead, and there were almost no immediate family members left. The remaining people fought fiercely for the property, especially the relatives of the Jean family. At that time, some people thought of avenging Jean Wen and the rest, but before they had the chance, the police exterminated the remaining members of the Jean family and dug up all the previous incidents. After all, the Jean family wasn't clean, and this incident was so serious that the old scores were immediately dug up. Of course, there were also some departments behind the scenes. After the call, Renbachien felt relieved and completely let go of this matter. The Jean family had already fallen apart and could no longer cause any trouble. For the next period of time, Renbachien had absolutely nothing to do. Occasionally, he would go to the school that was still under construction. The 3 brick houses had basically been completed. Sometimes, Renbachien would think of something and ask the person in charge to add a little something in a certain place. For example, a swing. For example, digging a ditch to bring in water from a nearby stream. For example, building a pavilion. The rest of the time, he would practice or receive Tong Lan's one-on-one tutoring. Every time he lay on the ground after being educated by Tong Lan, he would always remember a man saying, "I'm invincible" in my background music. However, Renbachien was exactly the opposite of him. "I've never won in my background music." What a painful realization. Traveling back and forth between the other world and Earth, his progress was still slow, but his strength had recently increased to more than 450 kilograms. At this time, Rinpoche couldn't see the surrounding scenery clearly at the bottom of the lake, but he estimated that he shouldn't be far from the bottom. When he touched the bottom of the lake, he would have completed the cultivation of the visualization of water, and reached the initial stage of the man-will level. This was a qualitative change. When he reached the initial stage of the man-will level, his entire body would undergo some changes, indicating that he had taken an important step. In Great Xia, only 1 in 1,000 practitioners could reach the man-will level, and only 1 in 100 could reach the earth-will level. From this ratio, some problems could be explained. The man-will level was an extremely important threshold. Early in the morning, Rinpoche cleaned himself up and shaved his hair, revealing his green scalp. He also shaved his beard. He even took a cold shower. Then, he picked up Gun, who was hugging his thigh, and threw it to the side, causing it to collide with Tian. Tian and Gun were sent to Pingle Park recently. Otherwise, Rinpoche would have missed them. He simply informed the Empress and got someone to send them over. When he arrived at Yangshin Palace Hall, the Empress was reading a thread-bound book. "Your Majesty, do you want to return with me? Have a taste of our new year and home-cooked meals." Rinpoche stood beside her, leaned his upper body against the wooden couch, and moved closer to see what the Empress was looking at. "Are you going home?" The Empress straightened her body and asked. She then casually slapped the book on his body. "Yes." Rinpoche nodded. It was time to go back. It had been so long. If not for the fact that the Empress was always by his side, he would have returned long ago. "I'm not going," the Empress immediately rejected him. Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief after hearing what the Empress said. After all, even though the Empress treated him well, she was still very cold to others. In addition, she had been in charge of life and death for a long time. Furthermore, she had the aura of a top-notch expert. Ordinary people would probably feel uneasy around her. Just by releasing a little bit of her aura, a vacuum zone would appear around her, and no one would appear around her. If he really brought the Empress back, he was afraid that there would be an awkward silence, and then an awkward silence. Therefore, Rinpoche felt that this wasn't a good time. However, it was still up to the Empress to decide whether to go or not. It seemed like the Empress didn't want to see anyone else now. The solar furnace should have arrived at Mount Damo by now, right? Rinpoche calculated that it had already been half a month. Even though it was a mirror type and had to be transported carefully, it should have arrived in half a month. According to the journey, it should have arrived yesterday, the Empress said. She had received the news previously. If they used the Yabber to send the letter, they should have received it by today. After all, not only Rinpoche and the Empress were concerned about this matter, but many people in the imperial court were also paying attention to it. This was a major event that could affect the entire Dayo. The people from the Ministry of Works, Ministry of Revenue, and Ministry of War were also waiting for the news. On Mount Damo, dozens of people were busy fixing concave mirrors on a huge shelf. A group of people surrounded them and watched the show from afar. "This thing can melt Mount Damo." Gu Qiong, the supervisor of the iron mine at Mount Damo, and many of his subordinates looked at them busily. When he recalled what these people said last night, he was still in disbelief. "You will know in a while." The person who spoke was Tao Jiyuan from the Department of Ordnance. He followed them this time around. Regarding this solar furnace, he had naturally heard of it. Those who saw it with their own eyes that day often talked about it. He had also heard Feng Ho talk about it. He heard that it used the energy of the sun to melt steel. However, he wasn't very clear about the specifics. Following the busy craftsmen, the mirrors were fixed on the shelf one by one, just like a jigsaw puzzle. After spending the entire morning, the mirrors on the shelf were finally installed. Dozens of people took out some flat mirrors and began to adjust the angles. Finally, all the mirrors reflected the sunlight onto the solar furnace, and then onto an area with a radius of 0.5 meter on Mount Damo. Everyone focused their attention there, wanting to see what would happen. In less than a minute or two, they could see the mountain start to turn red, smoke, and then catch fire. 3 minutes later, the molten iron started to melt and flowed down the mountain wall. "It's done." The person who cheered was the leader of the craftsmen. His name was Peng Zhe. Following which, the other craftsmen also cheered. After working for such a long time, there were finally no problems. On the other hand, the others were dumbfounded as they looked at the molten iron flowing down Mount Damo. They actually did it. Previously, the method of burning the mountain could increase the output of the iron mine by several times. With this thing, it wasn't just a few times, but more than 10 times, or even 100 times. Following which, the craftsmen prepared to install the second solar furnace. This time around, they brought enough concave mirrors to make 3 of these solar furnaces. At the same time, someone taught Gu Qiong how to adjust the angle of the mirrors and the angle of the shelf. This was taught by Renbaqian. After all, they couldn't just melt a single point. At the same time, there was also a metal box that was specially used to collect the molten iron. All they had to do was place it at the bottom. When the molten iron fell into the metal box, it would heat up the metal box, but it wouldn't melt. After all, the molten iron would cool down as it fell. Some of the molten iron would cool down and form wall hangings on the mountain wall. As for these newly formed wall hangings, as long as a hammer was used to smash them, they would fall. After 2 hours, the molten iron that flowed down and the iron pieces that fell and solidified on the mountain wall weighed about 500 kilograms. A solar furnace could be used for about 6 hours a day. At other times, due to the angle of the sun, the sunlight couldn't be reflected onto Mount Damo through the mirrors and the solar furnace. However, in just 3 hours, 1,500 kilograms of iron could be produced. 3 solar furnaces would be equivalent to 9,000 kilograms of iron. Excluding the rainy days, there would be at least 200 sunny days in a year. That was to say, Tao Jiyuan sat on the ground without a care for his image. He didn't have enough fingers to count and couldn't calculate for a long time. 8 million kilograms. When Tao Jiyuan finally came up with this number, his lips were trembling. This number really scared him. When the others heard it, they also started to tremble. Gu Qiong's face was flushed as if he had drunk too much. One had to know that Dayo's annual production of iron was only about 5,000 kilograms. Now, with this solar furnace, the annual production of iron was equivalent to 100 years of iron production from Mount Damo and Mount Liuzue. This number was simply too terrifying. Furthermore, as long as there were enough manpower and solar energy, this number would continue to increase. Based on the production of a saber that weighed 20 kilograms, close to 100,000 sabers could be produced in a year. One had to know that for so many years, Dayo didn't have a 100,000 strong army. One of the main reasons was the lack of weapons. Among the commoners, a short saber could be regarded as a family heirloom. When this news reached the Ministry of Works, the Ministry of War, and the Ministry of Revenue, these few departments were about to explode. The loud noise could even be heard on the streets outside. Tong Jinye and Qin Chuan's wild laughter lasted for the time it took to burn a joss stick. Even though they had seen Renbaqian demonstrate the solar furnace, they didn't expect it to be so effective. That night, Tong Jinye from the Ministry of Works and Qin Chuan from the Ministry of War invited their subordinates to a banquet at House Yunyan. In the end, it turned into a decisive battle at the summit of a brothel. Tong Jinye had the last laugh again. When the Empress received this news, she was a little dazed at first. Soon after, she revealed a look of joy. At this rate, they could produce 200,000 weapons in 2 years. They didn't even need that many weapons. As long as they could produce 50,000 weapons, Dayo would have an additional 50,000 strong soldiers. 30,000 of them would be transferred to the Protectorate of the North and the remaining 20,000 to the Protectorate of the Southeast and Protectorate of the Northeast. At that time, even if Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Qin nation launched an attack together, she wouldn't need to worry. The Empress was excited. She stood up and walked a few steps in the hall. However, she remembered that the person who could share this joy with her wasn't here at this moment. At this moment, Renbaqian didn't know about this. Even if he knew, he probably wouldn't be as happy as the others. An annual production of 1.8 million kilograms was only 1,800 tons, which was about the same as the annual steel production of the Tang dynasty. One had to know that the annual steel production of China on Earth was 1 billion tons. 1,800 tons wasn't even enough to meet the steel consumption of a small city. However, this was already a huge improvement for Dayo. At the very least, in terms of weapons, they would have sufficient stocks and wouldn't be controlled by others anymore. Chapter 282. Renbaqian parked his car in the neighborhood and stared blankly for a long time. It was impossible for one to be afraid of homesickness. However, after escaping and coming back, there were still some feelings. At this time, there were many children setting off firecrackers. There were also people pasting couplets and hanging lanterns. Although the atmosphere of the new year had been fading over the years, the atmosphere in this neighborhood was still quite strong, perhaps because there were many old people. Not long after, Renbaqian's cell phone rang. Just as he answered the call, he heard his father shouting, "Why are you still in a daze? Is your girlfriend here?" Renbaqian's parents were extremely concerned about the woman who was by his side even when he was on the run. No. Renbaqian had only said one word when he was interrupted by his father. "In that case, quickly come up and help me paste the couplets." Renbaqian looked up and saw a figure flash past the window. It seemed that his father had been waiting there all along. Renbaqian got out of the car, took out his things, and carried them upstairs. Before he could knock, his father opened the door and stood up to let him in. Mama Ren hurriedly came over and sized him up. "You have become much darker. Did you suffer much?" Speaking of suffering, Renbaqian was full of bitter tears. He felt that he had suffered a lot. For example, he was beaten up by the little lowly with one hand, beaten up by the little lowly with both hands, and beaten up by the little lowly. In any case, he was beaten up once every 2 days. In addition, he would occasionally get punched in the chest by the Empress's small fists, which seriously injured him. It was indeed bitter. At present, Renbaqian was almost certain that his first serious injury was also caused by the Empress. It was just that he couldn't figure out why. As for the darkness, it would be strange if the sun in Dayo wasn't scorching hot. Putting down the things, he spread his hands and said, "Look at my face. Do I look like I suffered? It's mainly because I've been sightseeing in Europe, so it's a good opportunity to go out and see the scenery outside. You have gained a lot of weight. How many kilograms are you now?" Papa Ren asked casually after sizing him up. 160. Recently, Renbaqian's physique had been going up in a straight line. He looked fine wearing thick clothes now, but after taking them off, his entire body was full of muscles. "In the past, I ate every day at home and didn't gain weight. Now that I've gone out for a walk, I've gained weight." Mama Ren complained about how Renbaqian didn't gain weight at home but gained weight after going out for a walk. There's a lot of junk food in Europe and America, and there are all kinds of high-calorie foods. Fortunately, I've been training every day recently, otherwise I wouldn't be like this. You still have the cheek to talk about training. You still have the mood to train. Do you know how worried we were? As Mama Rin spoke, she poked Renbochen's forehead with her one young finger. I'm helping the country with some things. Renbochen added, I'm a civil servant now. Renbochen and Renbochen were surprised. I can be considered a staff member of a certain department. There's no danger and I'm in charge of some simple tasks, Renbochen said. What about your business? It doesn't matter. This civil servant is actually a part-time job. It's just an identity. There is such a thing. Papa Ren and Mama Ren felt that it was somewhat inconceivable. In many places, people would fight to become civil servants. How could Renbochen still have a part-time job? I brought something back for you this time. Renbochen opened his bag and took out a wooden box. This is a product that our company is going to launch soon. It's called Black Jade Reconnection Ointment. If you suffer from external injuries, just apply a little of it and you'll be healed immediately. Bah! Mama Ren spat. I've also read Jin Yong's new works. Kid, your words are getting more and more out of hand. Renbochen thought about it and decided not to tell his mother that Jin Yong and Jin Yongxin were two different people. Speaking of which, Jin Yongxin was also quite amazing. As long as he wrote a book, it would be written by Jin Yong. The name of the medicine hasn't been decided yet, but the effect is real. As for external injuries, just apply this on them and they won't even leave a scar. Keep it well. Renbochen placed the small box on the table. The rest are clothes for you and your parents. Try them on when you have time. Aren't we going to put up couplets? Work first. Where did Wanyin go? Renbochen asked curiously. Why wasn't Wanyin home on New Year's Eve? He seems to have gotten a girlfriend. She's his high school classmate. I reckon that they are already together, Mama Rin said somewhat discontentedly. In her opinion, it was still too early for a freshman to fall in love. Not bad. Otherwise, all the good cabbages would have been eaten by pigs. Renbochen nodded. Then, he suffered another blow from the six-pulse divine sword. If you didn't mention it, I almost forgot to ask. What's the name of your girlfriend? Where did he come from? You didn't invite her. Mama Ren's face immediately lit up. I'm from another city, and I'm celebrating the new year. Renbochen waved his hand. What's her name? What's her job? Why was she around when you were in Europe? Mama Ren still wouldn't let him off. Her surname is Qi, and her name is Zixiao. She's a civil servant and is considered my superior. Don't I have a part-time job? That's it. Renbochen managed to deal with all his mother's questions with great difficulty and went to the corridor with his father to put up couplets and the word fu. It was past 2 in the afternoon when Renbochen returned. Renbochen was sitting on the sofa and chatting with his father. He was talking about his experiences in Europe and, of course, omitted many inappropriate things for children. For example, he made a lot of sakuma that was drenched in ketchup. According to him, this trip was basically a sightseeing tour. Of course, the truth was almost the same. During dinner, Papa Ren and Mama Ren asked a bunch of questions about his girlfriend, such as her birth date, family situation, and so on. This made Renbochen's head hurt. 8 characters of birth, how could there be 8 characters of birth in that world? His grandfather was the founding emperor and was obsessed with cultivation. No one knew whether he was dead or alive. His father was the late emperor who was obsessed with cultivation and went missing after getting seriously injured. Could he say this? Would you believe it if I said it? The family celebrated the new year together. The next day, Renbochen started to walk the streets and visit his relatives and friends. After his accident, his relatives were really nice. Nothing melodramatic happened. Instead, they helped Papa Ren and Mama Ren gather a lot of information. It was reasonable for Rinpoche to visit them and mention his identity as a civil servant at the same time. This made his family feel that he was similar to 007. After all, he carried the lives of more than 10 people and returned half a year later as if nothing had happened. This made it hard for people to doubt his words. For ordinary people, Rinpoche was considered a legend. Rinpoche didn't comment on this. If he revealed his girlfriend, he could engrave the word legend on his forehead. He didn't need to reveal it because Mama Ren helped him reveal it. Now that Rinpoche was successful in his business and had become a civil servant with 5 insurances and 1 housing fund, there were many people who wanted to introduce him to a marriage partner. Mama Ren then showed the photo that he had posted on his WeChat moments to everyone, but there was no response. Brother. Ren Wanyan sneaked up to Rinpoche. Sister-in-law, do you have a younger sister? No, get lost. Rinpoche slapped the back of his head. Chapter 283. Rinpoche stayed at home for a few days, enjoyed his family's affection, and received all kinds of gazes. Then, he returned to Deo. After changing his clothes, Rinpoche carried a bag to Yangshin Palace Hall. The bag contained the dumplings, braised pork, and eggplant boxes that Rinpoche's mother gave him. The Empress was curled up on the sofa watching Qing Yunji with a tomato-flavored potato chip in her hand. Seeing that Rinpoche had returned, the Empress glanced at him indifferently, ignored him, and focused on watching the television series. Your Majesty, I brought you some dumplings. They were made at home, and I insisted on bringing them to you. Rinpoche lifted the bag in his hand. He took a look behind the Empress, pointed at the main character on the screen, and said, I always felt that men look ugly like this, and they are almost the same as women. The Empress glanced at Rinpoche, looked at the gigolo on the screen, and ignored him. Although the one in the television series was indeed similar to a woman. However, Rinpoche wasn't much better. He was just a little stronger now. When Rinpoche first arrived, he was also thin and weak. His waist wasn't even as thick as a human's arm. As for his appearance, there was no need to talk about it. Mount Damo has installed solar furnaces. With 3 solar furnaces, they can produce 3,000 kilograms of iron a day. The Empress thought for a while and told Rinpoche this good news. Even though a day had passed, she still felt happy. And Rinpoche was the one who could share this joy with her. They did a good job. Rinpoche's face revealed a happy expression. Although it was much worse than the modern world, it was already a good start with Deo's foundation. With the remaining iron, he could also make other things. For example, steam engines. Rinpoche and the Empress curled up on the sofa, each sitting at one end. Their actions were surprisingly identical, and they were hugging their legs. The Empress realized that he was copying her, so she quietly picked up a potato chip and threw it at his face. After being seriously injured previously, the two of them consciously kept some distance between each other. Rinpoche was really too weak to be hurt. A light blow could seriously injure him. He was no different from tofu residue. However, this kind of small action was much more natural. Both of them felt that it was pretty good. From the next day onwards, Rinpoche resumed his normal life. Practicing martial arts, getting beaten up, and at the same time, preparing to teach the students. After all, the day was approaching. In another 3 weeks, Deo's new year would be over, and it would be time for the students to report for duty. While preparing the teaching materials, Rinpoche realized that being a teacher wasn't an easy task. The students in Deo were different from when he was young. At that time, he had no other choice. Everyone else also learned the same things and went through layers of examinations to enter university. Furthermore, these things were still new to Deo. They needed to be interesting and attractive to Deo in order to do so. For the time being, Rinpoche's courses were Chinese, mathematics, physics, and chemistry. Among them, language was still easy. The main thing was literacy. Simplified Chinese characters. He was ready to spread simplified Chinese characters to this world. Mathematics was a necessity. Adding and subtracting with less than 2 digits required one to break one's fingers. Anything with more than 2 digits required one to guess. This was a common situation among the Aboriginal commoners. The officials were not much better off. They could do simple addition and subtraction, but if it was slightly more complicated, they would have to scratch their heads. Only the people from the Ministry of Revenue had mastered the multiplication and division of 2-digit numbers. There was almost no foundation in physical chemistry in this world. For example, when you hit a rock, your fist would hurt. Everyone knew this. If one were to ask why, it was simply nonsense. After all, a rock was harder than a fist. These were all reasons that should be taken for granted. He had not even considered the deeper effects of power, let alone others. If they wanted to build Deo into a well-off imperialist society with Deo's characteristics, it would not be possible without these foundations. No matter how strong one was, he could only destroy and not use it to build. Except for brick moving. Deo had tens of millions of god-level brick-moving workers who could carry hundreds of kilograms of bricks as if they were flying. At this moment, Rinpoche was surrounded by darkness. He could only see a little bit of light when he raised his head. He was completely surrounded by water. The huge pressure almost kneaded Rinpoche together. Every inch of his body was under tremendous pressure. The last bit of air in his lungs was squeezed out. Rinpoche knew that he was going back soon. However, he still tried his best to dive down, even if it was just a little bit. At this moment, his fingertips seemed to have touched something, causing his body to tremble. The lake was dead silent. There wasn't even a single water plant. It had been a few months since he touched something in the water. Could it be that I have touched the bottom of the lake? Rinpoche was ecstatic. Did touching the bottom of the lake mean that he had finally reached the threshold of the manual level? However, his strength had also dissipated. His vision started to turn black. Soon after, he returned to the real world and felt extremely tired. After waking up, Rinpoche felt his body and didn't seem to have changed much. At this moment, his strength was about 250 kilograms, which was achieved bit by bit during this period of time. Other than that, his strength and speed didn't change much from yesterday. Have I reached the manual level? Rinpoche wasn't too sure. He went out of the house and asked someone to prepare a medicinal bath. After soaking in the medicinal bath, he was still pondering. The manual level was a barrier, and there should be some changes after he passed it. It seemed that he hadn't reached the manual level yet. In that case, he would have to wait until he practiced at night. After soaking in the medicinal bath, Rinpoche left the palace with the guards and went straight to the glass factory. At this time, the end of the year was approaching, and there were a lot more people in Lawn City. Many men and women wearing animal skins bought some salt, cloth, and other things in Lawn City and brought them back to the village. They also brought a lot of furs and other things when they went down the mountain. Many of them simply tied up the wild beasts and carried them over. Rinpoche saw a sharp-toothed tiger tied up and hung on a tree trunk. 2 people carried it, one in front and one behind, into the city. In addition, there were many other things, such as strange horns, birds in cages, and other things that Rinpoche had never seen before. They could only be found deep in the mountains. Rinpoche brought the ox rider and ran all the way to the glass factory. Under Jiao's lead, they entered a house. Inside, there were neatly stacked wooden boxes that emitted a fragrant smell of wood. He went forward and opened one of the boxes. Inside, there were crystal-clear glass cups. Every 2 cups were filled with hay to prevent them from being damaged during transportation. Renbochin was used to seeing glass products and didn't think much of it. However, when Zhao Zuo looked at these cups, his face was filled with pride. These were made by him and those craftsmen. After that, Renbochin went to the side and opened another box. Inside, there were many vertical silver mirrors. They were basically round and inlaid in a wooden disc. Renbochin examined them carefully and nodded his head in satisfaction. These were the goods that would be sent to the other 3 countries after a period of time. At present, if the gold, silver, and gemstones in the palace's treasury were exchanged for medicine, they could support him for 3 months at most. Although there would be a batch of gold and silver being sent to the palace at the end of the year. However, these gold and silver were the expenses of the palace next year, including the salaries of the palace guards, palace maids, the imperial concubines, and the daily expenses of the Empress. Therefore, what Renbochin needed for his future training would depend on this batch of goods. At this time, it was close to the new year. The 2 caravans that belonged to the imperial family had already returned. When they left after the new year, they would bring these goods to the other countries and let them spit out some of the profits that they had previously earned in Dayo. The craftsmen will be rewarded with 10 taels of silver each, the apprentices and handymen will be rewarded with 3 taels each, and you will be rewarded with 20 taels of silver. You will be rewarded with 20 taels of silver. I will get someone to send the money over later. Everyone will have a fat new year, Renbochin said faintly as he closed the box and left. Sir is wise. It is our fortune to be able to work under you. Zhao Zuo quickly said. Chapter 284. That night, Renbochin entered the visualization of water again. It was still a lifeless lake with a faint mist and a few small trees. Renbochin couldn't wait and dived into the lake. He swam to the center of the lake and dived down. 10 meters, 20 meters, 30 meters. The water pressure was getting stronger and the surrounding optical fibers were getting dimmer and dimmer. However, Renbochin's condition today was better than yesterday. His heart was burning with passion. When his fingers touched the object below again, there was still a little bit of air left in Renbochin's lungs. According to his experience, he could hold on for another 10 seconds or so. These days, he was very familiar with the condition of his body when he dived down. Due to the lack of oxygen in his lungs, Renbochin started to feel a burning pain. He focused all his attention on his hands and touched his surroundings. It wasn't mud as he expected, but a stone-like bottom. At the same time, one of his hands touched something protruding out. When he wanted to carefully identify what it was, he suddenly woke up and felt tired all over. What a pity, just a little bit more, Renbochin thought. But just a little bit more. I can definitely do it tomorrow. Renbochin waved his fist, but he didn't have any energy and went straight to sleep. The next day, Renbochin dived to the bottom of the lake again to look for the object he touched last night. This time, he finally touched it. It was something that looked like a stone ring. When he woke up from the visualization of water, he was somewhat unwilling. He was just a little bit away. That stone ring should be pulled off, right? Could it be pulled off? Was there something below? Renbochin thought to himself. There was no record of this in the re-visualization. I can definitely do it tomorrow. Renbochin lay on the bed and waved his arms. On the 3rd day, Renbochin withdrew from the visualization of water, again with a trace of unwillingness on his face. I can definitely do it tomorrow. On the 4th day, Renbochin withdrew from the visualization of water, and lay on the bed, damn it. On the 5th day, Renbochin cursed, F***ck. There wasn't much progress over the past 5 days. Even Rinpoche had some doubts about whether his method was wrong. However, in the end, Rinpoche carefully thought about the Rui visualization that he was practicing. This visualization of water, from the start, was to absorb the effects of medicine and change his body little by little. Besides increasing his strength, his stamina was much better than before. For example, even if he walked for a few hours, he would not feel tired at all. His daily visualization of water dive to the bottom of the lake was to put pressure on his body on the consciousness level. At the same time, it affected his external body and unearthed his body's potential. This was the process of his body absorbing the medicinal effects. From the beginning, the visualization of water had always been used for this purpose. Then, that Shi Huan definitely wasn't playing some puzzle-solving game with him. Instead, it was the same as before, trying to squeeze him dry so that he could unearth his body's potential. Now that he was at the bottom of the lake, what he needed to do was to pull up the stone chains. At the thought of this, Rinpoche made up his mind. If one day wasn't enough, then 2. One day, he would be able to pull up that stone ring. After a few more days, Rinpoche returned from Earth and took another medicinal bath. He pulled the stone hoop again, and after using all his strength, he finally felt as if he could pull it up a little. This made him overjoyed. He knew that he had done the right thing. The stone slab under the stone ring was pulled up a little. There seemed to be a door there. Another day passed. On this day, Rinpoche was lying on his bed practicing the visualization of water. His originally calm body suddenly trembled. 2 streams of heat flowed from his kidneys and began to circulate throughout his body. Wherever the 2 streams of heat flowed, his blood vessels and veins bulged. His muscles also bulged as if there was something swimming under his muscles. As the heat flowed through his body, Rinpoche's body heated up and turned red at the same time. It was as if he was having a high fever. His body temperature quickly rose to 40 degrees Celsius. However, all his sweat pores were tightly shut, and the heat could not be discharged along with his sweat. After a while, Rinpoche's head began to emit a steam-like gas, just like a large kettle. If this was seen by someone on Earth, they would probably think that they were witnessing the legendary 3 flowers at the crown and 5 cheese toward the origin. After a long time, the white gas on Rinpoche's head began to decrease, and his body temperature also dropped. At this moment, Rinpoche slowly woke up. He had just woken up, but he did not feel the feeling of breaking through a bottleneck or advancing in his cultivation. His whole body felt exhausted, thirsty, and tired. His mind was not very clear, and he only wanted to have a good sleep. He struggled to get up and drank 3 cups of water before falling into a deep sleep on the bed. Rinpoche was woken up by hunger. He could not see the exact time, but the sky was not bright yet. His stomach felt like it was on fire, and every cell in his body was screaming for hunger. He got up from the bed, ran out of the room at lightning speed, picked up a bamboo shoot that was prepared for Tian Tian and Gun Gun, and started to chew on it. The 2 little chaps were woken up by him. When they realized that he was secretly eating their bamboo shoots, they staggered forward and wanted to snatch it back. However, Rinpoche's eyes were glowing green. He even had the intention to roast these 2 chaps. When he saw them, he could smell the smell of meat. Sir Ren. The guards outside were alarmed by the noise inside. They came in to check and found Rinpoche squatting there. His eyes were glowing green, and he looked terrifying. "Quick, bring me to the imperial kitchen. I am going to starve to death." Rinpoche had already finished his second bamboo shoot, but his stomach did not feel any better. He knew what he needed. Meat, a lot of meat. When they arrived at the imperial kitchen, Rinpoche did not see any leftovers. Regardless of whether it was vegetables or meat, they were all raw. He chewed on the fruits while getting someone to start the fire and stew the meat. After struggling for 3 hours, Renbochin ate 2 pots of meat consecutively, which weighed about 15 to 20 kilograms, before the feeling of hunger finally subsided. Renbochin leaned against the wall and sat on the ground. He really wanted to curse in his heart. The last time he encountered such a situation, it was the same for this breakthrough. The next time he broke through, he must prepare food first. At least, he had to prepare a few kilograms of braised beef. Otherwise, the feeling of hunger from head to toe wasn't something an ordinary person could endure. After resting, Renbochin picked his teeth while strolling back to Pingle Park. The sky was already bright. At this moment, Renbochin felt a little uncomfortable. It was as if his body was a lot more relaxed. His legs were light, and walking was almost like a moonwalk. When he returned to Pingle Park, he tried running 10 meters in an instant. His speed was much faster than before. If he needed around 13 seconds to run 100 meters previously, he only needed around 8 to 9 seconds now. However, he still felt as if he was not exerting his strength. The sudden change in his body made it difficult for him to control it. At the same time, the speed of his punches had increased a lot. This was especially true for his strength. When Renbochin returned to Pingle Park and played with the stone dumbbell, his strength had increased by at least 50 kilograms. This meant that he now had more than 600 kilograms of strength. As for his jumping ability, this was the biggest improvement. He was able to jump up a 2-meter-tall wall with just one step. Renbochin clenched his fists with a face full of joy. This breakthrough had actually improved his body so much. Following which, he asked the guards to help him test out other aspects of his abilities. He realized that his dynamic vision and reaction time were much faster than before. For example, when he was fighting with Tong Lan previously, he couldn't see her movements clearly. Even if he could see them occasionally, his body couldn't react in time. After the test, Renbochin was excited for the whole day. He had finally advanced to the manual level and could be considered a practitioner. Furthermore, his strength had improved a lot. Even though his strength had only increased from 250 kilograms to 600 kilograms, the result of this increase of 100 kilograms was crushing. Needless to say, his speed had increased by 40%, his jumping ability had doubled, and his dynamic vision and reaction time had increased by 30%. If he were to compare his current strength with that of a day ago, Renbochin felt that he could fight against 3 people effortlessly. A difference of 30% to 40% wasn't considered big, but in fact, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. If he were to fight with his previous self, he would be able to see the movements that he couldn't see clearly previously. He could now dodge the attacks that he couldn't dodge previously. On the other hand, Tong Lan's perspective was the exact opposite. Renbochin had an excited smile on his face all the way until he stood with Tong Lan at the training ground in the afternoon. First, he played the background music for himself. Theme. As the majestic music sounded, it was as if the prologue of a smoky battlefield had begun. Renbochin's blood was boiling. After being beaten up by the little Lolita for so long, he could finally take revenge today. He could finally rise up. Even if he still wasn't her match, he wanted to give her a scare. Sir Tong. Renbochin suddenly put away his previous expression and smiled at the person behind the little Lolita. Then, he lowered his body and rushed toward Tong Lan like a leopard. His first move was a series of punches. The little Lolita was startled by his sudden increase in speed and was indeed caught unprepared. However, it was only for a moment. Bang! Renbochin flew out in an arc and landed heavily on the ground. Sigh, such is life. Renbochin lay on the ground, looked at the azure sky, and let out a faint sigh. Your strength has improved. The little Lolita was surprised. Renbochin actually improved so much today compared to the day before yesterday. He actually improved from lying down after 2 moves to lying down after 4 moves, which was a full improvement. Renbochin opened his mouth and blew a bubble. No matter what, he had already advanced from a level 2 rookie to a level 3 rookie. Furthermore, he discovered a problem during this exchange. His ability to withstand blows had also improved. Previously, when Tong Lan's fists hit his body, it was still very painful. But now, it was only slightly painful and much less painful than before. Tong Lan controlled her strength very well and had always used the same amount of strength. In other words, his ability to withstand blows had also improved by a lot. Previously, he was seriously injured by the Empress's small fists and was on the verge of death. The current him should only be seriously injured. Chapter 285. Even though he was lectured by Tong Lan again about why the flowers were so red, he was still delighted. After all, it was one's own strength. The feeling of being stronger than before and being filled with power still filled one with joy. To be honest, stepping into the man-will level was only the beginning. It had only been 6 months since he came to this world. To be able to reach this level was already enough to make him happy and a little proud. He was indeed a talent. In just over 6 months, he had already reached the man-will level without any foundation. After careful calculation, he realized that he had only been cultivating for 4 months at most. Only 1 in 1,000 practitioners could attain the man-will level. This was the difference between geniuses and mortals. Furthermore, if he reached the man-will level before Dao's new year, it wouldn't be too embarrassing for him to participate in the lantern-grabbing contest. Renbochin hummed a tune as he arrived at Yangxin Palace Hall. He then heard a cold snort and a voice full of murderous intent. He's courting death. Find out where he is. When Renbochin entered Yangxin Palace Hall, he saw 2 tall and sturdy men wearing leather armor. The leather armor looked a little old and there were traces of swords and knives on it. You guys can leave first. Find him, the Water Empress said coldly. Yes, Your Majesty. The 2 of them cupped their hands in greeting before turning around and leaving. However, their expressions were somewhat troubled. It would not be easy to find an expert like Lu Pinghai. If he was in Dao, it would be easy to find him. However, the other party's main activity area was in Great Xia, and it was extremely difficult to find him. When they turned around, Renbochin realized that they were twins. If he remembered correctly, they should be from the Protectorate of the North. He had seen them from afar in Ping City. After the 2 left, Renbochin stepped forward and asked, Your Majesty, why are you so angry? I'm looking for Lu Pinghai to exchange for something. I'll even let him ask for anything he wants. As long as it's not too much, I'll agree. However, he thinks too highly of himself and actually rejected me. The Empress was still angry. Renbochin smiled bitterly. This seemed to be normal. However, this wasn't normal in the eyes of the Empress. The name Lu Pinghai sounded familiar. Renbochin thought about it carefully and realized that he was the 8th most powerful expert in the world. He had done some homework these few days. Is it very important? Renbochin probed. The Empress was so angry, and her target was the 8th most powerful expert in the world. Presumably, the item was very important. You can say that. The Water Empress replied. The Spirit Yuan pill was of no use to her and was completely for Renbochin. At that time, because Renbochin's physical foundation was too weak, he could only cultivate Rui visualization. Therefore, she asked Hongwu to send someone to look for Lu Pinghai to exchange for a Spirit Yuan pill that could supplement his physical foundation and increase his cultivation speed with the remaining medicinal power. However, Renbochin actually smoothly reached the most important threshold of Rui visualization, and attained the man-will level within a few months. Furthermore, this visualization did have some tricks up its sleeves. It was able to strengthen a person's foundation with such a poor foundation and allow him to enter the man-will level steadily. It was just that the consumption was a little too high. However, whether the elixir was useful or not was one thing, and whether Lu Pinghai would give it to him or not was another matter. She was still quite angry at Lu Pinghai for rejecting her. This was her personality. She had given her conditions, and as long as it wasn't too much, she would agree to it. If you refuse me, I will beat you to death. That Lu Pinghai really doesn't know how to appreciate favors. As long as we find him, throw a bottle of sarin gas at him and bring back the things he has on him. Ren Baqin acted like an incompetent advisor. No matter which side he was definitely on the Empress's side. He just had to remember two things. First, the Empress was always right. Second, please refer to the first thing. The Empress felt very gratified after listening to his words. He relied on the fact that even if someone found him, he would be long gone by the time I arrived. No one else could keep up with his speed. Otherwise, I will meet him personally and see what else he has to say before he dies. The Empress was a little annoyed. Even though she had asked the two brothers to investigate, she knew that it wasn't very meaningful. Ren Baqin thought for a while. Without satellites, it wasn't very realistic to use a tracking device. There was no other way. He doesn't have a fixed place. Ren Baqin asked curiously. His whereabouts have always been secretive. He only goes to a fishing village in the East Sea for a few days at the end of November every year. That's hard to say. When he goes there again next year, we can just wait there. The Empress nodded her head slightly. Her current goal had already changed. Previously, her goal was to obtain the Spirit Yuan pill. Now, her goal was to kill Lu Pinghai. Since this was the case, there was no harm in letting him live for another year. Do you have any candidates for the lantern grabbing contest? The Empress changed the topic and asked. She really wanted to see how Ren Baqin would perform. Can't we just choose a few young imperial guards from the palace? Ren Baqin asked in reply. I'm afraid we can't find 9 people below the age of 25 in the palace, the Empress said. There were very few new imperial guards in the palace. Most of them were left behind by the previous emperor. Over the years, there were very few replacements. Ren Baqin was stunned and his eyes widened. He really didn't expect this problem. He actually couldn't even find 9 people below the age of 25 in the palace. Go and ask Axayanja how many imperial guards are below the age of 25 in the palace, the Empress instructed someone behind her. Qing Yuan hurriedly left the hall. After a while, Qing Yuan returned and said to the Empress, Your Majesty, there are 3. The Empress turned to Ren Baqin and said, You are still short of 6 people. Think of a way yourself. Ren Baqin scratched his head. It was easy to find people because there were so many of them on the streets. However, he couldn't possibly find a few ordinary people to make up the numbers, right? It wouldn't look good on him. Even though he didn't want to win the championship, he couldn't be too embarrassing. It seemed like he had to look for reinforcements. Ren Baqin pondered for a while. He was more familiar with the people in the Ministry of Works. It was better to seek help from that old man, Tong Jingye. He brought the Imperial Guards out of the palace and went straight to the Ministry of Works. Only then did he find out that the Ministry of Works didn't have much to do as it was nearing the end of the year. Tong Jingye had already returned home. Ren Baqin hurriedly brought his men to the Tong residence. After explaining the purpose of his visit to the gatekeeper, he waited outside. After the time it took to burn 2 incense sticks, Ren Baqin was finally brought in. Just a few steps into the door, he saw a little Lolita in white jumping out with a female guard following behind her. Good for nothing, why are you here? The little Lolita was very surprised. In view of the inhumane things that you have done to me, I'm going to deduct the 3,000 taels of silver that I owe your family as compensation for your mental distress. Out of morality, I'm here to inform your grandfather. Ren Bachien had a look of, "You are the main culprit," on his face. "It's fine if you call me good for nothing in the palace. Seeing that you are still a child, I won't lower myself to your level. You still dare to call me that outside? Where can I put my face? I specially asked my grandfather and he said that you have given him the money you owe." The little Lolita raised her head and looked at him with disdain. "If he didn't give me the money, I still have to beat him up. Grandfather said that if you don't give me the money, I will beat you to death. I heard that you are going to learn from me in half a month. Heaven and earth are the basis of life, the ancestors are the basis of life, the ruler and the teacher are the basis of governance. Remember to respect your teacher." Ren Baqian's face changed into a patient expression. Tong Lan blinked her eyes and looked at him blankly. "What are you talking about?" A teacher for a day, a father for life. Just remember this. I would like to have another son, but I'm afraid that Her Majesty won't agree. The voice of the old man, Tong Jingye, sounded faintly from the side. Ren Bachien wanted to curse, damn it. He had forgotten about this. Chapter 286. Ren Bachien explained the purpose of his visit to Tong Jingye and the guest room. Tong Jingye stroked his beard and said, "I have a grandson who is 18 years old this year. His strength is pretty good." Ren Bachien was originally prepared to borrow a few people with similar strength. He didn't expect Tong Jingye to actually have a grandson. But he seems to have formed a team with a few friends. The second half of Tong Jingye's sentence made Ren Bachien swallow the words that he was about to blurt out. "Why are you telling me this when you already have a team? Are you trying to show off that you have a grandson?" Ren Bachien started to feel that it was a mistake to look for Tong Jingye. This old man wasn't reliable at all. "Why don't you bring Tong Lan along?" Ren Bachien almost choked. He was going to grab a lantern. What was the point of bringing a little loli along? "Look, she's still a bit stronger than you. At the very least, you can't beat her. She'll probably think that you're a burden, but with this old man's help, she'll still agree." Over the years, there have also been female teams that have participated in the lantern-grabbing contest, Tong Jingye said as he spread his hands. Tong Jingye's words rendered Ren Bachien speechless. He really wasn't a match for that little Lolita. "Lend me a few earth will level servants. The people from the Ministry of Works will do as well. As for Tong Lan, forget about it. It won't be good if she gets hurt while snatching the lanterns," Ren Bachien said. Tong Jingye looked at Ren Bachien for a long time as if he was looking at a retard. Even Ren Bachien felt uncomfortable. Do you think young people with that level of strength are all cabbages? If he had that kind of strength at that age, he would have joined the army long ago. In the army, he would have been worth nurturing. How could he have become a servant? Those who had such strength at this age were mostly the sons of the imperial court officials or the talented commoners in Lan City. Every year, the young people who perform outstandingly in the lantern-grabbing competition, if they don't have a family background, are immediately recruited into the army or the public order bureau or the monitoring division. Ren Bachien was slightly stunned. All the imperial guards in the palace were at the earth will level. He was used to seeing them and had forgotten about this point. However, he didn't know the second half of Tong Jingye's words. It turned out that the lantern-grabbing competition was also used to select talented young people. But thinking about it, this was indeed a good idea. Ren Bachien suddenly thought of something and asked, "Do we have any examinations like the military selections?" "What is the military selection?" Tong Jingye asked curiously. Tong Jingye stroked his beard and said, it's almost the same as the Wushu examination in Great Xia. However, Dayo didn't have such a combat examination. This was because in the 70 years since the founding of Dayo, there had only been 3 emperors. The first was the founding emperor, Yipeng. During his era, it could be said that there were experts everywhere in Dayo. Any random person from the imperial court was not a weakling. In addition, the lifespans of the aboriginals were long to begin with, so they didn't need to replace the old with the new like in other countries. The imperial court already had its own people, so they didn't pay much attention to the selection of talents. However, that group of people had disappeared along with Yipeng. According to Rinpoche, he was so engrossed in cultivation that his whereabouts were unknown. However, everyone knew that there was definitely something they didn't know. Perhaps only those who had reached Yipeng's level of strength would know. All these years, Hongwu's biggest wish was to find out why that group of people had left and where they had gone. According to his guess, it should be in the depths of the 60,000 mountains. The second emperor was the former emperor. He reigned for the longest time, 42 years. When he succeeded the throne, it was also when Dayo was at its weakest. Almost all the experts of the older generation had left with Yipeng. At that time, he had chosen some talents. Some of them were the descendants of the previous experts, such as Tong Zhinya and Hongwu. Some of them were young experts that he had chosen from the villages in the 60,000 mountains and were now mainly in the protectorates. One of the more famous ones was Shi Wangu, the protector general of the south. He wasn't much weaker than Hongwu. However, Hongwu was already more than 60 years old this year, while Shi Wangu was only 40. It was believed that when Shi Wangu reached Hongwu's level of strength, he wouldn't be weaker than Hongwu. Shi Wangu's reputation in Dayo was extremely great, especially among the remnant citizens of the Han nation in the south. After that, it was the Empress. After one of his trips, the former emperor returned with serious injuries. He entrusted his orphan to Hongwu and then disappeared. At present, the imperial court of Dayo was still filled with the people left behind by the former emperor. Due to these various reasons, Dayo didn't have a talent selection system like Great Xia did. Instead, it was a system similar to a recommendation system. In addition to these historical reasons, there was another important point, which was that most of the commoners weren't educated. The best way out was to advance step by step in places like the army. Although the children of the court officials weren't highly educated, they were at least literate. They were influenced by what they saw since young and were more knowledgeable. After passing certain examinations, they were sent to various departments. After chatting with Tong Zhinya for a while, Rinpoche finally understood some of the current patterns in Dayo. In the end, it was because Dayo had only been founded for a short period of time. In addition, the lifespan of the aboriginal experts was too long. For example, Hongwu, Shi Wangu, Tong Zhinya, Qin Chuan, and the others could almost live to about 200 years old. There was no need to worry about the replacement of the old. As a result, no one realized the problem. It might take another few decades to 100 years for the hidden dangers to emerge. Rinpoche and Tong Zhinya chatted for a while. Someone knocked on the door to inform him that it was lunchtime. Rinpoche then realized that it was already noon and hurried back to the palace. On this trip to the Tong residence, Rinpoche's team had 3 more people. They were the little girl, Tong Lan, and Tong Zhinya's 2 nephews. There were 3 guards in the palace and 4 people including himself. At present, there were only 3 people left. Rinpoche thought about it and thought of someone he knew. However, he didn't know how his situation was and whether he had a team now. It was Du Changkong, whom Rinpoche met during the Great Hunt. He showed off his crossbow and ended up causing a lot of trouble. At that time, Rinpoche was prepared to exchange items from Earth for martial arts manuals. In the end, he didn't use them and never saw him again. Even though Du Changkong was a useless teammate, Ren Baqian still had a good impression of him. The next day, Ren Baqian asked around and went to the Du residence. Ren Baqian was considered a well-known figure in Lan City. No matter where he went, as long as people saw the guards around him, they would immediately know who he was. He was the gigolo who brought a group of palace guards around to show off every day. There was no one else but him. Second young master went out just now. Deputy Prefect Ren, why don't you wait in the residence for a while? I will go and look for him now. The burly man who was acting as the gatekeeper cupped his hands and said. No need, just tell me where he is. He might be drinking at Shanhui House at this time. The burly man said. Shanhui House, what a strange name. Do you know where it is? Ren Baqian turned his head and asked. It's on Jingyang Street. It's owned by the people of Shanhui Village. Usually, many descendants of the court officials go there, Su Wei said. Ren Baqian nodded, it's a gathering place for the descendants of the court officials. After a while, Ren Baqian appeared in front of a shop with his guards. This shop was inconspicuous and didn't have any signboards. There were only 2 square wooden signs at the door. One of them had the words, wine, and the other had the words, meat. This is rather interesting. Ren Baqian laughed and said to Su Wei, go up and ask Du Changkong to come down. I won't be going up. That guy is actually here. Someone on the second floor of the restaurant looked down and exclaimed in surprise. Who? Someone at the side craned his neck to take a look. Why is it him? Young Sparrow Hawk, your opponent is here. Young Sparrow Hawk has so many enemies. How would she know who it is? Someone at the side laughed. The others laughed as well. Lu Ruoyao directly picked up the wine jar and smashed it over. The man pushed the bottom of the jar with his empty hand, and the force that was flying horizontally was suddenly turned upwards by him. Then, he caught the falling jar and smiled. Treating me to a drink. I won't stand on ceremony then. Whenever she mentions it, she grits her teeth, but she can't do anything about it. The young man who was looking out of the window earlier turned his head and said. This time, more than 10 people immediately quietened down. Once this was said, everyone knew who it was. These days, they had been talking about him a lot. Soon after, everyone had a question, what is he doing here? Is Du Changkong around? Su Wei went up to the second floor and asked. Everyone's gaze immediately turned to a mature-looking man who looked to be in his 30s or 40s. Me? Du Changkong pointed at himself with his finger. He was a little surprised as he didn't expect Du Changkong to be looking for him. After such a long time, he thought that Du Changkong had already forgotten about him. Chapter 287. Du Changkong did not know why Ren Baqian was looking for him. With this thought in mind, he went downstairs and saw Ren Baqian standing there with a circle of guards surrounding him. Compared to when they first met, Ren Baqian was indeed a lot darker, but he was also a lot more well-dressed. The most important change was that he was full of vigor. Back then, Ren Baqian was still somewhat listless and less courageous. He gave off a much more reserved vibe. Now, with the changes in his status, strength, and outlook, he was no longer the same as he was in the past. Deputy Prefect Ren. Du Changkong cupped his hands. Brother Du. Ren Baqian carefully sized up Du Changkong. He looked mature and mature. Although he was 17 or 18 years old, he looked like he was in his 30s or 40s. He gave off the impression that he was a steady and reliable person. However, after dealing with Du Changkong once, he knew that this was just a facade. Du Changkong was a fraud and a typical pig-like teammate. But who asked him to be short of manpower now? I haven't seen you for a long time. Previously, I said that I would look for Brother Du after I came back. In the end, one thing led to another, and I haven't been able to get away. Renbachien hooked his arm around Du Changkong's shoulder. However, Du Changkong was taller than him by a head and had a strong physique. This made Renbachien rather uncomfortable and he put his arm down. It's good that Deputy Prefect Ren remembers me. Du Changkong grinned. Why is Deputy Prefect Du looking for me? Du Changkong hesitated for a while before asking. With Renbachien's current status, he was definitely not here to reminisce about the past. You know about the lantern grabbing contest during the new year, right? Do you have a team? I'm still short of one person, so I immediately thought of you. After all, we are acquaintances, and I'm confident in your abilities. Renbachien patted him on the shoulder. My brother and I formed a team. We have 4 people. Du Changkong felt a little awkward. In fact, he was well aware of Renbachien's strength. He could tell at a glance. However, he didn't really care about winning or losing. Friendship came first, competition came second, and participation was the most important. Furthermore, everyone knew that the Empress thought highly of Renbachien. Since they had interacted with each other before, it would be a good thing to use this opportunity to build a good relationship with him. Even though the Aboriginals were known to be straightforward, they were still capable of such calculations. How's his strength? Renbachien asked. Slightly worse than me, Du Changkong said after thinking for a while. That's easy. All 4 of you come in. It's settled then. Renbachien laughed heartily. This was a good thing. 4 people could come in directly, and one of the palace guards could be removed later. Otherwise, if the weakest one was eliminated based on strength, it would be him without a doubt. Other than himself or the palace guards, excluding the Tong clan, Du Changkong and the rest, it would not be good. How should we divide the work? Du Changkong asked. The lantern-grabbing team was usually made up of 10 people, and there were all kinds of roles. For example, the one in charge of opening the way was called Tooth Gate, the one in charge of snatching the lanterns was called Lantern Head, and the one in charge of preventing others from interfering with their own team and interfering with other teams was called Broom Pole. Of course, this was only a rough division. In reality, it was possible that the lamp holder had been killed, and Fong Men or Broom had come forward to snatch the lamp. Just like on the football field, a goalkeeper could also run into the opponent's penalty area to shoot. Let's meet the day after tomorrow, Renbachien said. Who else is there besides us? Du Changkong asked. Do you know Tong Lon? The granddaughter of the Minister of Works, Sir Tong. When Renbachien mentioned this name, Du Changkong's expression immediately became weird. It was as if he had a toothache or constipation. Why don't I introduce a few people to you? Du Changkong's face twitched, and he seemed to want to retreat. Why? Renbachien became curious. Du Changkong had such an expression when he heard Tong Lan's name. Was Tong Lan so powerful? That lass's mouth is too smelly. Furthermore, she is so young, and it would be a joke to be in a team with her. Renbachien agreed with the first sentence. That lass's mouth was indeed smelly. Renbachien patted Du Changkong's shoulder and said, It doesn't matter if her mouth is smelly or if she is young, but you have to take a long-term view. With your current mentality, you deserve to be single. Du Changkong was dumbfounded. What was Deputy Prefect Ren talking about? It's decided. Let's do it the day after tomorrow morning. The location will be at the training field beside the palace. Renbachien decided on this matter. Without waiting for Du Changkong to speak, he immediately got on the 4-corned cow and brought everyone back to the palace. Du Changkong rubbed his head. Other things were fine, but that last Tong Lan was really too annoying. When they went upstairs, a few people looked at them and asked, you have dealings with that person. I borrowed a crossbow from him in the past. She knows about it. Du Changkong pointed at Sparrow Hawk. Her face immediately turned black. He was touching a sore spot. Because of that crossbow, she was reprimanded by Renbachien, lost face in front of the Empress, and was eventually punished. On the other hand, that person had a meteoric rise. He was even chosen as the Empress's husband. Du Changkong's words were simply a slap to her face. Why did he look for you? Someone asked curiously. Lantern grabbing. Du Changkong sat at the side of the table and said in a muffled voice. He wants to participate in the lantern grabbing? Everyone was surprised. That person's strength was similar to that of an ant to them. He could be killed with a light punch. Yet, he actually wanted to participate in the lantern grabbing. Was he going to participate in the lantern grabbing or blackmail? Who would dare to touch him? He would probably be sent flying if he was squeezed. Du Changkong nodded his head and did not mention that Renbachian's strength had improved tremendously. His strength was equivalent to that of a man well expert in Great Xia. To everyone, he was still very weak. You agreed? Someone asked. I agreed. Du Changkong spread out his hands. Humph. A cold snort was heard. Without looking, everyone knew it was Lu Ruoyao. I'm afraid that you won't even be able to get close to him. Lu Ruoyao sneered. That's none of your business. Du Changkong wasn't a kind person. He was only afraid of Hong Xian. He didn't really care about Lu Ruoyao. Lu Ruoyao was so angry that she gritted her teeth. She was prepared to look for Hong Xian in a while. Originally, Hong Xian said that she wouldn't participate this year. However, since that person dared to participate, Hong Xian might be interested. She wouldn't be able to touch him during normal times. However, since he dared to participate in the lantern grabbing contest, he couldn't be blamed if he got seriously injured with just a light touch. In fact, she wasn't the only one who had this thought. After all, the Empress was the idol of many people in Dayo. Renbachien was still hated by many people. When they heard this news, several of them wondered if they would accidentally, lightly, touch him when the time came. Even though the others had this thought in their minds, they didn't show it. 2 days later, Renbachien left the palace early in the morning and went straight to the training field. At this time, it was time to change shifts and there weren't many people there. When he arrived, Du Changkong was already there with 3 other people beside him. 4 of them were squatting by the wall, eating a super large burrito in their hands. Deputy Prefect Ren. Du Changkong stood up and greeted Renbachien when he saw him. Brother Du. Renbachien got off his 4-corned cow and sized up the other 3 people. They looked a little like Du Changkong, but they weren't as old as Du Changkong. Those who didn't know would think that it was a father bringing his 3 sons out. Du Changyue, Du Changqing, and Du Changjiang are all my brothers. Deputy Prefect Ren, call me by my name. Otherwise, I'll feel awkward. Du Changkong introduced them in a low and muffled voice. Nice to meet you. Renbachien cupped his fists. The few of them quickly returned the greeting and sized up this legendary figure curiously. That girl isn't here yet. Renbachien turned his head to look. The few of them waited for more than an hour before they finally saw the few of them. Tong Lan was standing on the back of a 4-corned cow. When she got closer, she flipped over and jumped down. She stretched out her finger and pointed at Renbachien. With a face full of displeasure, she said, "You are such a good-for-nothing, yet you still dare to participate in the lantern-grabbing contest. You even persuaded Grandpa to let me team up with you. I might as well watch the show while eating fruits at the side since I can't win anyway. And these few, even though they are slightly better than you, they are still good-for-nothings. If I team up with all of you, others will easily think that I'm the same kind of trash as you. I'm still so young, how am I going to face others in the future? Tong Lan pointed at Rinpochen, the Du brothers, and the two young men who were smiling bitterly behind her. Can you beat her? Rinpochen turned his head and asked Du Changkong. Du Changkong looked like he was in pain, but he couldn't flare up. In the end, he shook his head sullenly. If Rinpochen hadn't been staring at him, he wouldn't have noticed it. Rinpochen widened his eyes. Du Changkong actually couldn't beat this girl. I still thought that she was only slightly more talented than ordinary children. In addition, she had been nurtured since young, so her martial arts were slightly better than ordinary children. That was why the Empress allowed her to be his sparring partner. It turned out that she wasn't a little girl, but a demoness. He had actually been tricked by the Empress for so long. To think that he had always felt that he couldn't even beat a 10-year-old child. It turned out that he wasn't alone. Chapter 288. Early in the morning, a group of people were scolded by a little loli, but they couldn't refute her. Their faces were twitching, and their faces were as black as the bottom of a pot. Only Rinpochen was in a good mood and was almost humming a tune. Anyway, I'm not alone. Although you guys are a bunch of trash, since Grandpa has spoken, I will reluctantly bring you guys to participate in this lantern grabbing contest. Just don't drag me down. After thinking for a while, she sighed and said with an aggrieved face, it's impossible for a bunch of good-for-nothings like you to not hold me back. This is my first time participating in the lantern grabbing contest, and I've already been ruined by you. Friendship comes first, competition comes second. The most important thing is to participate. Rinpochen added. The four Du brothers nodded in unison, like chicks pecking at grains. Tong Lan squinted at him and said, that's how a loser comforts himself. If we can get first place, why should we get second place? Rinpochen lowered his head, looked at Tong Lan, sighed slightly, and said, until now, you still don't know the true meaning of lantern grabbing. Do you think so many people are grabbing lanterns just to decide the champion? Tong Lan looked up with a look of disdain. Don't tell me you're going there to make friends. Not entirely, but you are still too young to understand the meaning behind it. I understand very well. Rinpochen continued to speak with a doting expression on his face. Tong Lan really wanted to give him a kick. Everyone looked at Rinpochen to see what he had to say. The purpose of this lantern-grabbing activity is to educate the Aboriginal youths through sports without any discrimination and with the lantern-grabbing spirit, to promote mutual understanding in the spirit of excellence, unity, and fair competition. Thus, to contribute to a peaceful and better world. It could be summarized as peace, friendship, and progress. Du Changkong, everyone was shocked. They never thought that a lantern-grabbing contest could have such a profound meaning. Rinpochen waved his arms. Our slogan is, higher, faster, stronger. Sir Ren is still the one who sees things clearly. Peace, friendship, and progress are the objectives of our participation in the lantern-grabbing contest. Higher, faster, and stronger are our watchwords. Du Changkong immediately applauded. Everyone was stunned. Are we talking about the same thing as the two of you? Why did he feel that something was not quite right? Rinpochen didn't care whether they believed him or not. In any case, he had to say it this way. In a while, he would discuss with Her Majesty about pasting this motto and slogan all over Lan City. Alright, since everyone is here, let's talk about the arrangements. Tong Lan will be the lantern head to snatch the lantern, I will be the tooth door to open the path, and the two from the Tong family, Su Lo and Jiang, who will be the broom on the left and right to protect Tong Lan. Du Changkong and the rest of you will be the roaming sentries to prevent the enemy's roaming sentries from approaching and provide support to the broom, Rinpochen said as he clapped his hands. Su Lo and Jiang, who were the two guards in the palace. This was a relatively common arrangement. However, the lantern grabbing competition was not a football competition. Most of the time, there would be a chaotic battle towards the end. There were only two key players. One was Toothgate, who was in charge of clearing the path for the lantern grabbers. If Toothgate was blocked, the entire team would be hindered. The other was the lamp holder. The lamp holder was placed under the shelf. The main thing to look at was the lamp holder. It was not allowed for the lamp holder to pass through the Toothgate and go to the lamp stand alone. One must have the Toothgate or two brooms by their side, otherwise they would be eliminated. Just like on the battlefield, a general couldn't just abandon his army and charge into the enemy's formation alone, right? The rules of the lantern grabbing competition were also the most basic way to cultivate teamwork and combat habits. As a result, it was often held in the army. It wasn't only held during the new year, but it wasn't usually so grand. In Dayo, the lantern grabbing competition was equivalent to modern football. The lamp holder was generally the strongest in the team, followed by the Toothgate. Everyone didn't have any objections to Tong Lan being the lamp holder, but Renbochin being the Toothgate shocked everyone. You are going to be the Toothgate. Tong Lan widened her eyes in disbelief. Do you want me to carry you, a burden, to the lampstand? Renbochin waved his hand and said, Don't look down on me. I have already made arrangements. When the time comes, I won't be a burden. No one can stop me. Do you believe this? Tong Lan widened her eyes and questioned him. I can't use weapons, but I can wear armor, right? Renbochin retorted. Even if you wrap yourself up like a turtle, will it be of any use? I will let all of you see what it means to be unstoppable. Renbochin looked very confident. Although the aboriginals were very powerful and those who participated in the lantern grabbing competition weren't mediocre. However, even a tiger wouldn't be able to swallow a hedgehog. Everyone stared at him, wanting to know where this mysterious confidence of his came from. Tong Lan puffed up her bun face and said dejectedly, It's over. I can't even get close to the lamp stand in my first lantern grabbing competition. It's so embarrassing. If people bring this up in the future, it will be a dark history. Tomorrow, I will get a cloth to cover my face. She learned the term dark history from Renbochin. Renbochin looked at her bun face and wanted to pinch it, but he didn't dare to. He reckoned that he would have to participate in the lantern grabbing competition with a caste. Today is just a meeting. Don't worry too much. Even if we can't win, I won't blame you. Like I said before, friendship comes first, competition comes second. Our goal is to go higher, faster, and stronger. Everyone continued to look at him. It's because of you that we can't win. Otherwise, there might be a little bit of hope. With you around, that little bit of hope is gone. Next, let's meet here at noon on the first day of the Lunar New Year and participate in the lantern grabbing competition together. Renbochin said to them. Everyone nodded except for Tong Lan, who was still grumbling unhappily like a chatterbox. However, Renbochin ignored her. The lantern grabbing competition usually started at around 7:00 in the evening. Usually, people would arrive at around 5:00 in advance to participate. Renbochin arrived 4 hours earlier because he wanted to discuss it again. Even if it was a last-minute preparation, it would still be beneficial. Everyone, see you in 5 days. Renbochin cupped his hands at everyone and left on his fork-horned cow with the guards. Tong Lan looked at Renbochin leaving and snorted. In a flash, she landed on the back of the fork-horned cow. Without waiting for the other two people, she rode the fork-horned cow back. After everyone left, Du Chongqing said, It doesn't seem very reliable. It doesn't matter. In any case, we didn't expect to win, Du Chongqing said. Everyone nodded their heads. During the lantern grabbing competition, there were indeed many capable people. A few outstanding people from the younger generation would participate. After all, this was also an opportunity to showcase the strength of the next generation. Compared to those people, the few of them were indeed not enough. The next day, notices were pasted all over Lawn City. Many people surrounded them curiously, waiting for someone to explain what was written on them. The person in the middle had a strange expression on his face as he said, "This notice says that this year's lantern-grabbing event is to educate the Aboriginal youths through sports that are free of any discrimination and have the lantern-grabbing spirit, the spirit of excellence, unity, fair competition, and mutual understanding. Thus, they will contribute to a peaceful and better world. In short, peace, friendship, and progress. Not only this year, but this will also be the purpose of future lantern-grabbing competitions." Towards the end, his voice was almost like the buzzing of a mosquito. When he said the first few sentences, the entire place became dead silent. Everyone was dumbfounded. What was he saying? Chapter 289. Half a month before the new year, Rinpoche could feel the festive atmosphere everywhere in Lawn City. There was a bustling crowd everywhere, and he could always see many Aboriginals bringing mountain products into Lawn City to exchange for various supplies. Even in the vicinity of Shirhu District and Yuwala District, there were many people sitting by the roadside with a few things they brought out from the mountains in front of them. There were herbs, baby animals, and even rare treasures. As a result, there was a sea of people in the vicinity every day, just like a market. Everyone had a smile on their face. After all, for most people, the new year was the most important time of the year. After hearing about the market, Rinpoche made 2 trips to see some strange things in this world. He even bought some small things that he found interesting, such as a green stone. In the dark, he could see small dots emitting white light on it, like stars. For example, there was a plant that bloomed every other day with a flower bud at the top. It bloomed on the first day, closed on the second day, and opened again on the third day. It kept blooming and closing like this, which was very interesting. There was also a kind of animal horn that was said to be able to travel hundreds of kilometers after being blown. However, humans couldn't hear it, and only certain animals could. In contrast to the liveliness in Lawn City, the palace was deserted. A palace gate separated the inside and the outside world into 2 different worlds. The Empress didn't seem to care much about the new year. Everything in the palace was going on as usual, and everyone else was doing their own things without any decorations or preparations. After all, the Empress had always been the only person in the palace, and there was no one to talk to or share with. As a result, such a festival had no meaning other than the new year to the Empress. However, there was one more person this year, so it was somewhat different. "Your Majesty, why don't we decorate the palace as well?" Rinpoche suggested when he saw the Empress sitting there watching a television series. When he passed by Beihong District, he saw that many of the mansions of the court officials were being cleaned and decorated. It was a very strange arrangement. Many bones were drilled into holes, tied with a piece of cloth, and hung on the wall. When the wind blew, there would be whimpering sounds and the sound of bones knocking on the wall. The entire Beihong district was filled with a quiet breeze. Every time Rinpoche passed by these 2 days, he would shiver and feel that the surrounding air seemed to be a little colder. How was this a festive occasion? It was like a haunted house. Was this done to scare people? He didn't know who was such a genius to actually think of such a creative New Year decoration. However, the people in the mansions all looked happy, which made him feel weird. The Empress gently propped her chin with her finger, looked at him, and said indifferently, "Do what you want." Rinpoche bade farewell to the Empress and returned to Earth. When he came back, he brought along 2 big bags filled with colorful LED lights and bells. Now that he had more than 600 gene of strength, he could carry a lot more things at once. It was several times more than before, and he didn't have to be so restricted every time he carried things. He first asked people to make a few wooden frames and erected them on both sides of Yangxin Palace Hall. He then called for Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan to get busy in Yangxin Palace Hall. They connected the colorful lanterns in the air and hung up the bells. Even though the task wasn't complicated, they still had to run from both sides. Out of the three of them, two of them stood on the racks while Rinpoche ran back and forth between the two racks with a roll of lanterns. He handed one end of the lanterns to one of the racks and then pulled it to the other end. The Empress was watching a television series, but she was not in the mood to watch it. From time to time, she would look at the three busy people at the bottom of the stairs in a daze. It seemed like it had not been lively for a long time. Or rather, it had never been lively. Yangxin Palace Hall had always been cold and cheerless. Even when she was young and her father was here, it was the same. Even she felt that it should be like this. Therefore, Rinpoche's busy schedule made her feel novel, interesting, and warm. The Empress did not realize that she had a smile on her face. It took them half a day to connect the light strips. Rinpoche plugged them in and the colors of the entire Yangxin Palace Hall began to change. From the moment they entered, the two sides and the top were covered with light strips, emitting colorful rays of light. Furthermore, the rays of light seemed to be flowing. This kind of light strip only weighed 18 kilograms per 100 meters. Rinpoche brought a total of 2,000 meters and made the entire Yangxin Palace Hall colorful. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan didn't know what the two of them were doing, but they almost screamed when they saw the scenery. At this moment, Yangxin Palace Hall was no longer cold and cheerless. It was filled with fascinating colors. Even the Empress was pleasantly surprised. She didn't expect that she would be so beautiful and dazzling after finishing it. Not only that, Rinpoche also got someone to cut down 2 trees and place them near the Empress's bed. He then wrapped the light strips around the trees. "Your Majesty, this is the palace that belongs to you." Rinpoche wiped the perspiration off his forehead. He had been running back and forth while carrying such a heavy lantern belt. It was quite tiring for him. However, looking at the colorful Yangxin Palace Hall, which looked like a palace from a fairy tale, he was very satisfied. The Empress was pleasantly surprised and her heart was filled with tenderness. For a moment, she did not know what to say. After a long time, she said softly, "It's very beautiful. I like it very much." Rinpoche's heart softened when he heard the Empress's gentle voice. This was probably the most romantic thing he had done in his life so far. "However, I'm afraid the battery pack is not enough. I brought back another set of batteries. Together with the previous 4 sets of batteries, it can only last for 5 hours." Rinpoche felt slightly regretful. He felt that it was a pity that such a beautiful scenery couldn't be lit up all the time. Previously, he did not bring too many batteries with him. He prepared a total of 4 sets of batteries to sustain the Empress's use for watching television dramas, table lamps, and charging the walkie-talkie. This time, he brought another set of batteries, which made up for only 5 sets. It seemed like he had to bring back a battery with a larger capacity next time. Following which, Rinpoche, Qing Yuan, and Hong Yuan hung countless silver bells on the light strips. As the breeze blew, the entire Yangxin Palace Hall was filled with the melodious sound of the bells. This sound was much better than the ghostly wails and howls of the bone whistles in the air above the residences in Beihong district. Then, the Empress listened to the silver bells for an entire night and almost couldn't fall asleep. It was really too noisy. She didn't feel it during the day, but it became apparent in the dead of night. However, the Empress still didn't allow anyone to remove the silver bells. The next day, it was as if nothing had happened. Chapter 290. Yesterday, a reader asked in the book review section why it had become 3 stars. I only realized it after that. There were originally just over 100 reviews, but it was directly increased to over 5,000 reviews. I'm Really a Superstar only had a rating of over 2,000, The Cultivation Group only had a rating of over 1,800, and Nanny Dad only had a rating of over 500. My book actually had over 5,000 reviews, which was 10 times more than Nanny Dad and more than twice as much as a superstar. Haha. The reviews had been increased to 3 stars. In this world, there were always some people who wanted to drag others down when they couldn't do it themselves. Never underestimate the dark psychology of some people. Maybe they just didn't like you, or for some other reason, they would plot against you. There were many disputes when people became famous, but the problem was that I wasn't famous yet, so why was I in such a hurry to reveal my true colors? So, readers who could give reviews, please help me pull the ratings down a little. Tomorrow, I'll see if the editor can delete those reviews that have been increased. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.